This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Little Frenchman and His Water Lots by George Pope Morris. How much real comfort everyone might enjoy if he would be contented with lot in which heaven has cast him, and how much trouble would be avoided if people would only let well alone. A moderate independence, quietly and honestly procured, is certainly every way preferable even to immense possessions achieved by the wear and tear of mind and body so necessary to procure them. Yet there are very few individuals, let them be doing ever so well in the world, who are not always straining every nerve to the better, and this is one of the many causes why failures in business so frequently occur among us. The present generation seem unwilling to realize by slow and sure degrees, but choose rather to set their whole hopes upon a single cast, which either makes or marks them forever. Gentle reader, do you remember Monsieur Poupou? He used to keep a small toy store in Chatham, near the corner of Bird Street. You must recollect him, of course. He lived there for many years, and was one of the most polite and accommodating of shopkeepers. When a juvenile, you have bought chops and marbles of him 1,000 times. To be sure you have, and seen his vinegar visage lighted up with a smile as you flung him the coppers, and you have laughed at his little straight queue and his dimity breeches and all the other oddities that made up the everyday apparel of my little Frenchman. Ah, I perceive you recollect him now. Well then, there lives Monsieur Poupou, ever since he came from dear delightful Paris, as he wanted to call the city of his nativity. There he took in the pennies for his kickshaws. There he laid aside $5,000 against a rainy day. There he was as happy as a lark. And there, in all humane probability, he would have been to this very day a respected and substantial citizen, had he been willing to let well alone. But Monsieur Poupou had heard strange stories about the prodigious rise in real estate, and, having understood that most of his neighbors had become suddenly rich by speculating in lot, he instantly grew dissatisfied with his own lot, forthwith determined to shut up shop, turn everything into cash, and set about making money in right down earnest. No sooner said than done, and our quondam storekeeper, a few days afterward, attended an extensive sale of real estate at the Merchants' Exchange. There was the dog dictionary, with its beautiful and inviting lithographic maps, all the lots as smooth and square and enticingly laid out as possible, and there were the speculators, and there, in the midst of them, stood Monsieur Poupou. "Here they are, gentlemen," said he of the hammer, "the most valuable lots ever offered for sale. Give me a bid for them." 100 each," said the bystander. 100, said the dictionary, "scarcely enough to pay for the maps. 100 going, and 50 gone. Mr. H, they are yours. A noble purchase. You'll sell those same lots in less than a fortnight for $50,000 profit." Monsieur Poupou pricked up his ears at this, and was lost in astonishment. This was a much easier way, certainly, of accumulating riches than selling toys in Chatham Street, and he determined to buy and mend his fortune without delay. The auctioneer proceeded in his sale. Other parcels were offered and disposed of, and all the purchasers were promised immense advantages for their enterprise. At last came a more valuable parcel than all the rest. The company pressed around stand, and Monsieur Poupou did the same. "I now offer you, gentlemen, these magnificent lots, delightfully situated on Long Island, with valuable water privileges. Property in fee, title indisputable, terms of sale, cash. deeds ready for delivery immediately after the sale. How much for them? Give them a start of something. How much? The auditioner looked around. There were no bidders. At last, he caught the eye of Monsieur Poupou. Did you say 100, sir? Beautiful lots, valuable water privileges. Shall I say 100 for you? Oui, monsieur. I'll give you $100 apiece for the lot with the valuable water privilege. C'est ça. 100, only 100 apiece for these 60 valuable lots. Only 100. Going, gone. Monsieur Poupou was the fortunate possessor. The auctioneer congratulated him. The sale closed, and the company dispersed. Pardonnez-moi, monsieur, said Poupou, as the auctioneer descended his pedestal. You shall excuse-moi if I shall go to votre bureau, your counting house, very quick to make everything sure with respect to the lot with the valuable water privilege. One little bird in the hand, it was two in the tree, c'est vrai, eh? Certainly, sir. Well then, alors. And the gentleman repaired to the counting house, where the $6,000 were paid and the deeds of the property delivered. Monsieur Poupou put this carefully in his pocket, and as he was about taking his leave, the auctioneer made him a present of the lithographic outline of the lots, which was a very liberal thing on his part, considering the map was a beautiful specimen of that glorious art. Poupou could not admire it sufficiently. There were these 60 lots, as uniform as possible, and his little grey eyes sparkled like diamonds as they wandered from one end of the spacious sheet to the other. Poupou's heart was as light as a feather, and he snapped his fingers in the very wantonness of joy as he repaired to Delmonico's and ordered the first good French dinner that had gladdened his palate since his arrival in America. After having discussed his repast, he washed it down with a bottle of choice old claret. He resolved upon a visit to Long Island to view his purchase. He consequently immediately hired a horse and gig, crossed Brooklyn Ferry, and drove along the margin of the river to the Wallabout, the location in question. Our friend, however, was not a little perplexed to find his property. Everything on the map was as fair and even as possible, while all the grounds about him were as undulated as they could well be imagined, and there was an elbow of the East River thrusting itself quite into the ribs of the land, which seemed to have no business there. This puzzled the Frenchman exceedingly, and, being a stranger in those parts, he called to a farmer in an adjacent field. "Mon ami, are you acquainted with this part of the country, eh?" "Yes, I was born here, and know every inch of it." "Ah, c'est bien, that will do." And the Frenchman got out of the gig, tied the horse, and produced his lithographic map. "Then, maybe, you'll have the kindness to show me the 60 lot which I have bought, with the valuable water privilege." The farmer glanced his eyes over the paper. "Yes, sir, with pleasure. If you will be good enough to get into my boat, I will row you out to them." "What did you say, sir?" "My friend," said the farmer, "this section of Long Island has recently been bought up by the speculators of New York and laid out for a great city. But the principal street is only visible at low tide. When this part of East River is filled up, it will be just there. Your lots, as you will perceive, are beyond it, and are now all under water." At first, the Frenchman was incredulous. He could not believe his senses. As the facts, however, gradually broke upon him, he shut one eye, squinted obliquely at Owens, the river, the farmer, and then he turned away and squinted at them all over again. There was this process, sure enough. But then it could not be perceived, for there was a river flowing over it. He drew a box from his waistcoat pocket, opened it with an emphatic knock upon the lid, took a pinch of snuff, and restored it to his waistcoat pocket as before. Poo-Poo was evidently in trouble, having thoughts which often lie too deep for tears. And, as his grief was also too big for words, he untied his horse, jumped into his gig, and returned to the dictionary in hot haste. It was near night when he arrived at the auction room, his horse in a foam and himself in a fury. The dictionary was leaning back in his chair, with his legs stuck out of a low window, quietly smoking a cigar after the labors of the day, and humming the music from the last new opera. Monsieur, I have much pleasure to find you chez vous, at home. Ah, Poo-Poo, glad to see you. Take a seat, old boy. But I shall not take the seat, sir. No. Why, what's the matter? Oh, beaucoup de matter. I have been to see the grand lot that you sell me today. Well, sir, I hope you like your purchase. No, sir, I no like him. I'm sorry for it, but there is no ground for your complaint. No, sir, there is no ground at all. The ground is all water. You joke. I no joke. I never joke. Je n'entends pas la Harari, sir. Voulez-vous have the kindness to give me back the money that I pay? Certainly not. Then will you be so good as to take the East River off the top of my lot? That's your business, sir, not mine. Then I make one mauvaise affaire, one grand mistake. I hope not. I don't think you have thrown your money away in the land. No, sir, but I throw it away in the water. That's not my fault. Yes, sir, but it is your fault. You're a very grand rascal to swindle me out of the l'argent. Hello, old Poo-Poo, you grow personal, and if you can't keep a civil tongue in your head, you must go out of my counting room. Where shall I go to, huh? To the devil for all I care, you foolish old Frenchman, said the oak dictionary, waxing warm. But, sir, I will not go to the devil to oblige you, replied the Frenchman, waxing warmer. You cheat me out of all the dollar lot I make in Chatham Street, but I will not go to the devil for all that. I wish you may go to the devil yourself, you damn Yankee, to hell, and I will go and drown myself to the suite, right away. You couldn't make a better use of your water privileges, old boy. Ah, miséricorde. Ah, mon Dieu, je suis abîmé. I am ruined. I am done up. I am break all into 10,000 little pieces. I am one lame duck, and I shall waddle across the grand ocean for Paris, which is the only valuable water privilege that is left me à présent. Poor Poo-Poo was as good as his word. He sailed in the next packet, and arrived in Paris almost as penniless as the day he left it. Should anyone feel disposed to doubt the veritable circumstances he recorded, let him cross the East River to the Wallabout, and Farmer J will row him out to the very place where the poor Frenchman's lots still remain, under water. End of The Little Frenchman and His Water Lots by George Pope Morris.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by West Winds 12. The Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. Far out at sea, the water is as blue as the bluest cornflower, and as clear as the clearest crystal. But it is very deep, too deep for any cable to fathom, and if many steeples were piled on the top of one another, they would not reach from the bed of the sea to the surface of the water. It is down there that the mermen live. Now, don't imagine that there are only bare white sands at the bottom. Oh no, the most wonderful trees and plants grow there, with such flexible stalks and leaves that at the slightest motion of the water they move just as if they were alive. All the fish, big and little, glide among the branches just as, up here, birds glide through the air. The palace of the Merman King lies in the very deepest part. Its walls are of coral and the long pointed windows of the clearest amber. But the roof is made of mussel shells, which open and shut with the lapping of the water. This has a lovely effect, for there are gleaming pearls in every shell, any one of which would be the pride of a queen's crown. The Merman King had been for many years a widower, but his old mother kept house for him. She was a clever woman, but so proud of her noble birth that she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while the other grandees were only allowed 6. Otherwise she was worthy of all praise, especially because she was so fond of the little mermaid princesses, her grandchildren. They were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of all. Her skin was as soft and delicate as a rose leaf, her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But like all the others she had no feet, and instead of legs she had a fish's tail. All the livelong day they used to play in the palace, in the great halls, where living flowers grew out of the walls. When the great amber windows were thrown open, the fish swam in, just as the swallows fly into our rooms when we open the windows. But the fish swam right up to the little princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be patted. Outside the palace was a large garden, with fiery red and deep blue trees, the fruit of which shone like gold, while the flowers glowed like fire on their ceaselessly waving stalks. The ground was of the finest sand, but it was of a blue phosphorescent tint. Everything was bathed in a wondrous blue light down there. You might more readily have supposed yourself to be high up in the air, with only the sky above and below you, than that you were at the bottom of the ocean, in a dead calm. You could just catch a glimpse of the sun, like a purple flower, with a stream of light radiating from its calyx. Each little princess had her own little plot of garden, where she could dig and plant just as she liked. One made her flower bed in the shape of a whale, another thought it nice to have hers like a little mermaid, but the youngest made hers quite round like the sun, and she would only have flowers of a rosy hue like its beams. She was a curious child, quiet and thoughtful, and while the other sisters decked out their gardens with all kinds of extraordinary objects which they got from wrecks, she would have nothing besides the rosy flowers like the sun up above, except a statue of a beautiful boy. It was hewn out of the purest white marble and had gone to the bottom from some wreck. By the statue she planted a rosy red weeping willow, which grew splendidly, and the fresh delicate branches hung round and over it, till they almost touched the blue sand, where the shadows showed violet and were ever moving like the branches. It looked as if the leaves and the roots were playfully interchanging kisses. Nothing gave her greater pleasure than to hear about the world of human beings up above. She made her old grandmother tell her all that she knew about ships and towns, people and animals. But above all it seemed strangely beautiful to her that up on the earth the flowers were scented, for they were not so at the bottom of the sea. Also that the woods were green, and that the fish which were to be seen among the branches could sing so loudly and sweetly that it was a delight to listen to them. You see, the grandmother called little birds fish, or the mermaids would not have understood her, as they had never seen a bird. "When you are 15," said the grandmother, "you will be allowed to rise up from the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight, and look at the big ships sailing by. You will also see woods and towns." One of the sisters would be 15 in the following year, but the others, well, they were each 1 year younger than the other, so that the youngest had 5 whole years to wait before she would be allowed to come up from the bottom to see what things were like on earth. But each one promised the others to give a full account of all that she had seen and found most wonderful on the first day. Their grandmother could never tell them enough, for there were so many things about which they wanted information. None of them was so full of longings as the youngest, the very one who had the longest time to wait, and who was so quiet and dreamy. Many a night she stood by the open windows and looked up through the dark blue water which the fish were lashing with their tails and fins. She could see the moon and the stars. It is true, their light was pale, but they looked much bigger through the water than they do to our eyes. When she saw a dark shadow glide between her and them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming above her, or else a ship laden with human beings. I am certain they never dreamt that a lovely little mermaid was standing down below, stretching up her white hands towards the keel. The eldest princess had now reached her 15th birthday, and was to venture above the water. When she came back she had hundreds of things to tell them, but the most delightful of all, she said, was to lie in the moonlight, on the sandbank, in a calm sea, and to gaze at the large town close to the shore, where the lights twinkled like hundreds of stars, to listen to music and the noise and bustle of carriages and people, to see the many church towers and spires, and to hear the bells ringing. And just because she could not go on shore, she longed for that most of all. Oh, how eagerly the youngest sister listened! And when, later in the evening, she stood at the open window and looked up through the dark blue water, she thought of the big town, with all its noise and bustle, and fancied that she could even hear the church bells ringing. The year after, the second sister was allowed to mount up through the water and swim about wherever she liked. The sun was just going down when she reached the surface, the most beautiful sight, she thought, that she had ever seen. The whole sky had looked like gold, she said, and as for the clouds, well, their beauty was beyond description. They floated in red and violet splendor over her head, and far faster than they went. A flock of wild swans flew like a long white veil over the water towards the setting sun. She swam towards it, but it sank, and all the rosy light on clouds and water faded away. The year after that the third sister went up, and, being much the most adventuresome of them all, swam up a broad river which ran into the sea. She saw beautiful green vine-clad hills, palaces and country seats peeping through splendid woods. She heard the birds singing, and the sun was so hot that she was often obliged to dive to cool her burning face. In a tiny bay she found a troop of little children running about naked and paddling in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they were frightened and ran away. Then a little black animal came up. It was a dog, but she had never seen one before. It barked so ferociously at her that she was frightened and made for the open sea. She could never forget the beautiful woods, the green hills, and the lovely children who could swim in the water although they had no fishes' tails. The fourth sister was not so brave. She stayed in the remotest part of the ocean, and, according to her account, that was the most beautiful spot. You could see for miles and miles around you, and the sky above was like a great glass dome. She had seen ships, but only far away, so that they looked like seagulls. There were grotesque dolphins turning somersaults, and gigantic whales squirting water through their nostrils like hundreds of fountains on every side. Now the fifth sister's turn came. Her birthday fell in the winter, so that she saw sights that the others had not seen on their first trips. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating about, each one of which looked like a pearl, she said, but was much larger than the church towers built by men. They took the most wonderful shapes, and sparkled like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest, and all the passing ships sheered off in alarm when they saw her sitting there with her long hair streaming loose in the wind. In the evening the sky became overcast with dark clouds. It thundered and lightened, and the huge icebergs, glittering in the bright lightning, were lifted high into the air by the black waves. All the ships shortened sail, and there was fear and trembling on every side. But she sat quietly on her floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning flash in zigzags down onto the shining sea. The first time any of the sisters rose above the water she was delighted by the novelties and beauties she saw. But once grown up, and at liberty to go where she liked, she became indifferent and longed for her home. In the course of a month or so they all said that, after all, their own home in the deep was best. It was so cozy there. Many an evening the five sisters, interlacing their arms, would rise above the water together. They had lovely voices, much clearer than any mortal, and when a storm was rising and they expected ships to be wrecked, they would sing in the most seductive strains of the wonders of the deep, bidding the seafarers to have no fear of them. But the sailors could not understand the words. They thought it was the voice of the storm. Nor could it be theirs to see this Elysium of the deep, for when the ship sank they were drowned, and only reached the merman's palace in death. When the elder sisters rose up in this manner, arm in arm, in the evening, the youngest remained behind quite alone, looking after them as if she must weep, but mermaids have no tears, and so they suffer all the more. "Oh, if I were only 15," she said, "I know how fond I shall be of the world above, and of the mortals who dwell there." At last her 15th birthday came. "Now we shall have you off our hands," said her grandmother, the old Queen Dowager. "Come now, let me adorn you like your other sisters." And she put a wreath of white lilies round her hair, but every petal of the flowers was half a pearl. Then the old queen had 8 oysters fixed onto the princess's tail to show her high rank. "But it hurts so," said the little mermaid. "You must endure the pain for the sake of the finery," said her grandmother. But oh, how gladly would she have shaken off all this splendor, and laid aside the heavy wreath. Her red flowers in her garden suited her much better, but she did not dare to make any alteration. "Good-bye," she said, and mounted as lightly and airily as a bubble through the water. The sun had just set when her head rose above the water, but the clouds were still lighted up with a rosy and golden splendor, and the evening star sparkled in the soft pink sky. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea as calm as a mill-pond. A big 3-masted ship lay close by, with only a single sail set, for there was not a breath of wind, and the sailors were sitting about the rigging, on the cross-trees and at the mastheads. There was music and singing on board, and as the evening closed in, hundreds of gaily colored lanterns were lighted. They looked like the flags of all the nations waving in the air. The little mermaid swam right up to the cabin windows, and every time she was lifted by the swell she could see through the transparent panes crowds of gaily dressed people. The handsomest of them all was the young prince with large dark eyes. He could not be much more than 16, and all these festivities were in honor of his birthday. The sailors danced on deck, and when the prince appeared among them hundreds of rockets were let off. making it as light as day, and frightening the little mermaid so much that she had to dive under the water. She soon ventured up again, and it was just as if all the stars of heaven were falling in showers round about her. She had never seen such magic fires. Great suns whirled around. Gorgeous fire fish hung in the blue air, and all was reflected in the calm and glassy sea. It was so light on board the ship that every little rope could be seen, and the people still better. Oh, how handsome the prince was! How he laughed and smiled as he greeted his guests, while the music rang out in the quiet night. It got quite late, but the little mermaid could not take her eyes off the ship and the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns were put out, no more rockets were sent up, and the cannon had ceased its thunder. But deep down in the sea there was a dull murmuring and moaning sound. Meanwhile she was rocked up and down on the waves, so that she could look into the cabin. But the ship got more and more way on. Sail after sail was filled by the wind. The waves grew stronger. Great clouds gathered, and it lightened in the distance. Oh, there was going to be a fearful storm! And soon the sailors had to shorten sail. The great ship rocked and rolled as she dashed over the angry sea. The black waves rose like mountains, high enough to overwhelm her, but she dived like a swan through them and rose again and again on their towering crests. The little mermaid thought it was a most amusing race, but not so the sailors. The ship creaked and groaned. The mighty timbers bulged and bent under the heavy blows. The water broke over the decks, snapping the mainmast like a reed. She keeled over on her side, and the water rushed into the hold. Now the little mermaid saw that they were in danger, and she had for her own sake to be aware of the floating beams and wreckage. One moment it was so pitch dark that she could not see at all, but when the lightning flashed it became so light that she could see all on board. Every man was looking out for his own safety as best he could, but she more particularly followed the young prince with her eyes, and when the ship went down she saw him sink in the deep sea. At first she was quite delighted, for now he was coming to be with her, but then she remembered that human beings could not live under water, and that only if he were dead could he go to her father's palace. No, he must not die! So she swam towards him all among the drifting beams and planks, quite forgetting that they might crush her. She dived deep down under the water and came up again through the waves, and at last reached the young prince just as he was becoming unable to swim any farther in the stormy sea. His limbs were numbed, his beautiful eyes were closing, and he must have died if the little mermaid had not come to the rescue. She held his head above the water and let the waves drive them whithersoever they would. By daybreak all the storm was over. Of the ship not a trace was to be seen. The sun rose from the water in radiant brilliance, and his rosy beams seemed to cast a glow of life into the prince's cheeks. But his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his fair and lofty brow and stroked back the dripping hair. It seemed to her that he was like the marble statue in her little garden. She kissed him again and longed that he might live. At last she saw dry land before her, high blue mountains on whose summits the white snow glistened as if a flock of swans had settled there. Down by the shore were beautiful green woods, and in the foreground a church or temple, she did not quite know which, but it was a building of some sort. Lemon and orange trees grew in the garden, and lofty palms stood by the gate. At this point the sea formed a little bay where the water was quite calm, but very deep, right up to the cliffs. At their foot was a strip of fine white sand to which she swam with the beautiful prince, and laid him down on it, taking great care that his head should rest high up in the warm sunshine. The bells now began to ring in the great white building, and a number of young maidens came into the garden. Then the little mermaid swam further off behind some high rocks, and covered her hair and breast with foam, so that no one should see her little face, and then she watched to see who would discover the poor prince. It was not long before one of the maidens came up to him. At first she seemed quite frightened, but only for a moment, and then she fetched several others, and the mermaid saw that the prince was coming to life, and that he smiled at all those around him, but he never smiled at her. You see, he did not know that she had saved him. She felt so sad that when he was led away into the great building, she dived sorrowfully into the water and made her way home to her father's palace. Always silent and thoughtful, she became more so now than ever. Her sisters often asked her what she had seen on her first visit to the surface, but she never would tell them anything. Many an evening and many a morning she would rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruit in the garden ripen, and then gathered. She saw the snow melt on the mountain tops, but she never saw the prince, so she always went home still sadder than before. At home her only consolation was to sit in her little garden with her arms twined around the handsome marble statue, which reminded her of the prince. It was all in gloomy shade now, as she had ceased to tend her flowers, and the garden had become a neglected wilderness of long stalks and leaves entangled with the branches of the tree. At last she could not bear it any longer, so she told one of her sisters, and from her it soon spread to the others, but to no one else except for one or two other mermaids who only told their dearest friends. One of these knew all about the prince. She had also seen the festivities on the ship. She knew where he came from and where his kingdom was situated. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses, and throwing their arms around each other's shoulders, they rose from the water in a long line just in front of the prince's palace. It was built of light yellow glistening stone, with great marble staircases, one of which led into the garden. Magnificent gilded cupolas rose above the roof, and the spaces between the columns which encircled the building were filled with life-like marble statues. Through the clear glass of the lofty windows you could see gorgeous halls adorned with costly silken hangings, and the pictures on the walls were a sight worth seeing. In the midst of the central hall a large fountain played, throwing its jets of spray upwards to the glass dome in the roof, through which the sunbeams lighted up the water and the beautiful plants which grew in the great basin. She knew now where he lived, and often used to go there in the evenings and by night over the water. She swam much nearer the land than any of the others dared. She even ventured right up the narrow channel, under the splendid marble terrace, which threw a long shadow over the water. She used to sit here looking at the young prince, who thought he was quite alone in the clear moonlight. She saw him many an evening sailing about in his beautiful boat, with flags waving and music playing. She used to peep through the green rushes, and if the wind happened to catch her long silvery veil, and anyone saw it, only thought it was a swan flapping its wings. Many a night she heard the fishermen, who were fishing by torchlight, talking over the good deeds of the young prince, and she was happy to think that she had saved his life when he was drifting about on the waves, half dead, and she could not forget how closely his head had pressed to her breast, and how passionately she had kissed him. But he knew nothing of all this, and never saw her even in his dreams. She became fonder and fonder of mankind, and longed more and more to be able to live among them. Their world seemed so infinitely bigger than hers. With their ships they could scour the ocean, they could ascend the mountains high above the clouds, and their wooded, grass-grown lands extended farther than her eye could reach. There was so much that she wanted to know, but her sisters could not give an answer to all her questions, so she asked her old grandmother, who knew the upper world well, and rightly called it the country above the sea. "If men were not drowned," asked the little mermaid, "do they live for ever? Do they not die as we do down here in the sea?" "Yes," said the old lady, "they have to die too, and their lifetime is even shorter than ours. We may live here for 300 years, but when we cease to exist we become mere foam on the water and do not have so much as a grave among our dear ones. We have no immortal souls. We have no future life. We are just like the green seaweed, which, once cut down, can never revive again. Men, on the other hand, have a soul which lives forever, lives after the body has become dust. It rises through the clear air up to the shining stars. Just as we rise from the water to see the land of mortals, so they rise up to unknown beautiful regions which we shall never see." "Why have we no mortal souls?" asked the little mermaid sadly. "I would give all my 300 years to be a human being for one day, and afterwards to have a share in the heavenly kingdom." "You must not be thinking about that," said the grandmother. "We are much better off and happier than human beings." "Then I shall have to die and to float as foam on the water, and never hear the music of the waves or see the beautiful flowers or the red sun? Is there nothing I can do to gain an immortal soul?" "No," said the grandmother, "only if a human being so loved you that you were more to him than father or mother. If all his thoughts and all his love were so centered in you that he would let the priest join your hands and would vow to be faithful to you here and to all eternity, then your body would become infused with his soul. Thus, and only thus, could you gain a share in the felicity of mankind. He would give you a soul while yet keeping his own. But that can never happen. That which is your greatest beauty in the sea, your fish's tail, is thought hideous up on earth. So little do they understand about it. To be pretty there, you must have 2 clumsy supports, which they call legs." Then the little mermaid sighed, and looked sadly at her fish's tail. "Let us be happy," said the grandmother. "We will hop and skip during our 300 years of life. It is surely a long enough time, and after it is over we shall rest all the better in our graves. There is to be a court ball to-night." This was much more splendid an affair than we ever see on earth. The walls and the ceiling of the great ballroom were of thick but transparent glass. Several hundred of colossal mussel shells, rose red and grass green, were arranged in order around the sides holding blue lights, which illuminated the whole room and shone through the walls, so that the sea outside was quite lit up. You could see countless fish, great and small, swimming towards the glass walls, some with shining scales of crimson hue, while others were golden and silvery. In the middle of the room was a broad stream of running water, and on this the mermaids and mermen danced to their own beautiful singing. No earthly beings have such lovely voices. The little mermaid sang more sweetly than any of them, and they all applauded her. For a moment she felt glad at heart, for she knew that she had the finest voice either in the sea or on land. But she soon began to think again about the upper world. She could not forget the handsome prince and her sorrow in not possessing, like him, an immortal soul. Therefore she stole out of her father's palace, and while all within was joy and merriment, she sat sadly in her little garden. Suddenly she heard the sound of a horn through the water. She thought, "Now he is out sailing up there, he whom I love more than father or mother, he to whom my thoughts cling and to whose hands I am ready to commit the happiness of my life. I will dare anything to win him and to gain an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, of whom I have always been very much afraid. She will perhaps be able to advise and help me." Thereupon the little mermaid left the garden and went towards the roaring whirlpools, at the back of which the witch lived. She had never been that way before. No flowers grew there, no seaweed, only the bare grey sands stretched towards the whirlpools, which like rushing mill wheels swirled round, dragging everything that came within reach down to the depths. She had to pass between these boiling eddies to reach the witch's domain, and for a long way the only path led over warm bubbling mud, which the witch called her peat bog. Her house stood behind this in the midst of a weird forest. All the trees and bushes were polyps, half animal and half plant. They looked like 100-headed snakes growing out of the sand. The branches were long slimy arms, with tentacles like wriggling worms, every joint of which, from the root to the outermost tip, was in constant motion. They wound themselves tightly round whatever they could lay hold of, and never let it escape. The little mermaid, standing outside, was quite frightened. Her heart beat fast with terror, and she nearly turned back. But then she remembered the prince and the immortal soul of mankind, and took courage. She bound her long flowing hair tightly around her head, so that the polyps should not seize her by it, folded her arms over her breast, and darted like a fish through the water, in between the hideous polyps, which stretched out their sensitive arms and tentacles towards her. She could see that every one of them had something or other which they had grasped with their 100 arms, and which they held as if in iron bands. The bleached bones of men who had perished at sea and sunk below peeped forth from the arms of some, while others clutched rudders and sea chests, or the skeleton of some land animal, and most horrible of all, a little mermaid whom they had caught and suffocated. Then she came to a large opening in the wood, where the ground was all slimy, and where some huge fat water snakes were gambolling about. In the middle of this opening was a house built of the bones of the wrecked. There sat the witch, letting a toad eat out of her mouth, just as mortals let a little canary eat sugar. She called the hideous water snakes her little chickens, and allowed them to crawl about on her unsightly bosom. "I know very well what you have come here for," said the witch. "It is very foolish of you. All the same, you shall have your way, because it will lead you into misfortune, my fine princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail, and instead to have 2 stumps to walk about upon, like human beings, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and that you may win him and an immortal soul. Ha 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 ha!" Saying this, she gave such a loud, hideous laugh that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and wriggled about there. "You are just in the nick of time," said the witch. "After sunrise to-morrow I should not be able to help you until another year had run its course. I will make you a potion, and before sunrise you must swim ashore with it. Seat yourself on the beach and drink it. Then your tail will divide and shrivel up to what men call beautiful legs. But it hurts. It is as if a sharp sword were running through you. All who see you will say that you are the most beautiful child of man they have ever seen. You will keep your gliding gait. No dancer will rival you, but every step you take will be as if you were treading upon sharp knives, so sharp as to draw blood. If you are willing to suffer all this, I am ready to help you." "Yes," said the little princess with a trembling voice, thinking of the prince and of winning an undying soul. "But remember," said the witch, "when once you have received a human form, you can never be a mermaid again. You will never again be able to dive down through the water to your sisters and to your father's palace. And if you do not succeed in winning the prince's love, so that for your sake he will forget father and mother, cleave to you with his whole heart, let the priest join your hands and make you man and wife, you will gain no immortal soul. The first morning after his marriage with another your heart will break, and you will turn into foam of the sea." "I will do it," said the little mermaid, as pale as death. "But you will have to pay me too," said the witch. "And it is no trifle that I demand. You have the most beautiful voice of any at the bottom of the sea, and I dare say that you think you will fascinate him with it. But you must give me that voice. I will have the best you possess in return for my precious potion. I have to mingle my own blood with it so as to make it as sharp as a two-edged sword." "But if you take my voice," said the little mermaid, "what have I left?" "Your beautiful form," said the witch, "your gliding gait, and your speaking eyes. With these you ought surely be able to bewitch a human heart. Well, have you lost courage? Put out your little tongue, and I will cut it off in payment for the powerful draught." "Let it be done," said the little mermaid, and the witch put on her cauldron to brew the magic potion. "There is nothing like cleanliness," said she, as she scoured the pot with a bundle of snakes. Then she punctured her breast and let the black blood drop into the cauldron, and the steam took the most weird shapes, enough to frighten anyone. Every moment the witch threw new ingredients into the pot, and when it boiled, the bubbling was like the sound of crocodiles weeping. At last the potion was ready, and it looked like the clearest water. "There it is," said the witch, and whereupon she cut off the tongue of the little mermaid, who was dumb now and could neither sing nor speak. "If the polyps should seize you when you go back through my wood," said the witch, "just drop a single drop of this liquid on them, and their arms and fingers will burst into 1,000 pieces." But the little mermaid had no need to do this, for at the mere sight of the bright liquid, which sparkled in her hand like a shining star, they drew back in terror. So she soon got past the wood, the bog, and the eddying whirlpools. She saw her father's palace. The lights were all out in the great ballroom, and no doubt all the household was asleep. But she did not dare to go in now that she was dumb and about to leave her home forever. She felt as if her heart would break with grief. She stole into the garden and plucked a flower from each of her sisters' plots, wafted with her hand countless kisses towards the palace, and then rose up through the dark blue water. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace, and landed at the beautiful marble steps. The moon was shining bright and clear. The little mermaid drank the burning, stinging draught, and it was like a sharp two-edged sword running through her tender frame. She fainted away, and lay as if she were dead. When the sun rose on the sea she woke up and became conscious of a sharp pang, but just in front of her stood the handsome young prince, fixing his coal black eyes on her. She cast hers down, and saw that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had the prettiest little white legs any maiden could desire. But she was quite naked, so she wrapped her long thick hair around her. The prince asked who she was, and how she came there. She looked at him tenderly, with a sad expression in her dark blue eyes, but could not speak. Then he took her by the hand and led her into the palace. Every step she took was, as the witch had warned beforehand, as if she were treading on sharp knives and spikes, but she bore it gladly. Led by the prince she moved as lightly as a bubble, and he and everyone else marvelled at her graceful gliding gait. Clothed in the costliest silks and muslins she was the greatest beauty in the palace, but she was dumb and could neither sing nor speak. Beautiful slaves clad in silks and gold came forward and sang to the prince and his royal parents. One of them sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. That made the little mermaid very sad, for she knew that she used to sing far better herself. She thought, "Oh, if he only knew that for the sake of being with him I had given up my voice for ever!" Now the slaves began to dance, graceful, undulating dances to enchanting music. Whereupon the little mermaid, lifting her beautiful white arms and raising herself on tiptoe, glided on the floor with a grace which none of the other dancers had yet attained. With every motion her grace and beauty became more apparent, and her eyes appealed more deeply to the heart than the songs of the slaves. Every one was delighted with it, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling, and she danced on, notwithstanding that every time her foot touched the ground it was like treading on sharp knives. The prince said that she should always be near him, and she was allowed to sleep outside his door on a velvet cushion. He had a man's dress made for her, so that she could ride about with him. They used to ride through scented woods, where the green branches brushed her shoulders, and little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed up the highest mountains with the prince, and although her delicate feet bled so that others saw it, she only laughed and followed him until they saw the clouds sailing below them, like a flock of birds taking flight to distant lands. At home in the prince's palace, when at night the others were asleep, she used to go out onto the marble steps. It cooled her burning feet to stand in the cold sea water, and at such times she used to think of those she had left in the deep. One night her sisters came arm in arm. They sang so sorrowfully as they swam on the water that she beckoned to them, and they recognized her, and told her how she had grieved them all. After that they visited her every night, and one night she saw, a long way out, her old grandmother, who for many years had not been above the water, and the merman king with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but did not venture so close to land as her sisters. Day by day she became dearer to the prince. He loved her as one loves a good sweet child, but it never entered his head to make her his queen. Yet unless she became his wife she would never win an everlasting soul, but on his wedding morning would turn into sea foam. "Am I not dearer to you than any of them?" the little mermaid's eyes seemed to say when he took her in his arms and kissed her beautiful brow. "Yes, you are the dearest one to me," said the prince, "for you have the best heart of them all, and you are fondest of me. You are also like a young girl I once saw, but whom I never expect to see again. I was on board a ship which was wrecked. I was driven on shore by the waves close to a holy temple where several young girls were ministering at a service. The youngest of them found me on the beach and saved my life. I saw her but twice. She was the only person I could love in this world. But you are like her. You almost drive her image out of my heart. She belongs to the holy temple, and therefore by good fortune you have been sent to me. We will never part." "Alas, he does not know that it was I who saved his life," thought the little mermaid. "I bore him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat behind the foam and watched to see if any one would come. I saw the pretty girl he loves better than me." And the mermaid heaved a bitter sigh, for she could not weep. "The girl belongs to the holy temple," he has said. "She will never return to the world. They will never meet again. I am here with him. I see him every day. Yes, I will tend him, love him, and give up my life to him." But now the rumour ran that the prince was to be married to the beautiful daughter of a neighbouring king, and for that reason was fitting out a splendid ship. It was given out that the prince was going on a voyage to see the adjoining countries, but it was without doubt to see the king's daughter. He was to have a great suite with him. But the little mermaid shook her head and laughed. She knew the prince's intentions much better than any of the others. I must take this voyage, he had said to her. I must go and see the beautiful princess. My parents demand that, but they will never force me to bring her home as my bride. I can never love her. She will not be like the lovely girl in the temple whom you resemble. If I ever had to choose a bride, it would sooner be you with your speaking eyes, my sweet dumb foundling. And he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long hair, and laid his head upon her heart, which already dreamt of human joys and an immortal soul. You are not frightened of the sea, I suppose, my dumb child, he said, as they stood on the proud ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighbouring king. And he told her about storms and calms, about curious fish in the deep, and the marvels seen by divers. And she smiled at his tales, for she knew all about the bottom of the sea much better than anyone else. At night, in the moonlight, when all were asleep except the steersman who stood at the helm, she sat at the side of the ship trying to pierce the clear water with her eyes, and fancied she saw her father's palace, and above it her old grandmother with her silver crown on her head, looking up through the cross currents towards the keel of the ship. Then her sisters rose above the water. They gazed sadly at her, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them, smiled, and was about to tell them that all was going well and happily with her, when the cabin boy approached, and the sisters dived down. But he supposed that the white objects he had seen were nothing but flakes of foam. The next morning the ship entered the harbour of the neighbouring king's magnificent city. The church bells rang, and trumpets were sounded from every lofty tower, while the soldiers paraded with flags flying and glittering bayonets. There was a fête every day. There was a succession of balls, and receptions followed one after the other. But the princess was not yet present. She was being brought up a long way off, in a holy temple, they said, and was learning all the royal virtues. At last she came. The little mermaid stood eager to see her beauty, and she was obliged to confess that a lovelier creature she had never beheld. Her complexion was exquisitely pure and delicate, and her trustful eyes of the deepest blue shone through their dark lashes. "It's you," said the prince, "you who saved me when I lay almost lifeless on the beach." And he clasped his blushing bride to his heart. "Oh, I am too happy!" he exclaimed to the little mermaid. "A greater joy than I had dared to hope for has come to pass. You will rejoice at my joy, for you love me better than any one." Then the little mermaid kissed his hand, and felt as if her heart were broken already. His wedding morn would bring death to her and change her to foam. All the church bells pealed, and heralds rode through the town proclaiming the nuptials. Upon every altar throughout the land fragrant oil was burnt in costly silver lamps. Amongst the swinging of the censers by the priests, the bride and the bridegroom joined hands and received the bishop's blessing. The little mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, stood holding the bride's train, but her ears were deaf to the festal strains. Her eyes saw nothing of the sacred ceremony. She was thinking of her coming death, and of all that she had lost in this world. That same evening the bride and bridegroom embarked. Amidst the roar of cannon and the waving of banners, a royal tent of purple and gold, softly cushioned, was raised amidships, where the bridal pair were to repose during the calm, cool night. The sails swelled in the wind, and the ship skimmed lightly and almost without motion over the transparent sea. At dusk lanterns of many colours were lighted, and the sailors danced merrily on deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of the first time she came up from the sea and saw the same splendour and gaiety, and she now threw herself among the dancers, whirling as a swallow skims through the air when pursued. The onlookers cheered her in amazement. Never had she danced so divinely. Her delicate feet pained her as if they were cut with knives, but she did not feel it, for the pain at her heart was much sharper. She knew that it was the last night that she would breathe the same air as he, and would look upon the mighty deep, and the blue starry heavens. An endless night without thought and without dreams awaited her, who neither had a soul nor could win one. The joy and revelry on board lasted till long past midnight. She went on laughing and dancing with the thought of death all the time in her heart. The prince caressed his lovely bride, and she played with his raven locks, and with their arms entwined they retired to the gorgeous tent. All became hushed and still on board the ship. Only the steersman stood at the helm. The little mermaid laid her white arms on the gunwale and looked eastwards for the pink-tinted dawn. The first sunbeam, she knew, would be her death. Then she saw her sisters rise from the water. They were as pale as she was. Their beautiful long hair no longer floated on the breeze, for it had been cut off. "We have given it to the witch to attain her help, so that you may not die to-night. She has given us a knife. Here it is. Look how sharp it is. Before the sun rises you must plunge it into the prince's heart, and when his warm blood sprinkles your feet they will join together and grow into a tail, and you will once more be a mermaid. You will be able to come down into the water to us, and to live out your 300 years before you are turned into dead, salt sea foam. Make haste! You or he must die before sunrise. Our old grandmother is so full of grief that her white hair has fallen off, as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Slay the prince and come back to us. Quick, quick! Do you not see the rosy streak in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise, and then you must die." Saying this they heaved a wondrous deep sigh, and sank among the waves. The little mermaid drew aside the purple curtain from the tent, and looked at the beautiful bride asleep with her head on the prince's breast. She bent over him and kissed his fair brow, looked at the sky where the dawn was spreading fast, looked at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who, in his dream, called his bride by name. Yes, she alone was in his thoughts. For a moment the knife quivered in her grasp, then she threw it far out among the waves, now rosy in the morning light, and where it fell the water bubbled up like drops of blood. Once more she looked at the prince, with her eyes already dimmed by death, then dashed overboard and fell, her body dissolved into foam. Now the sun rose from the sea, and with its kindly beams warmed the deadly cold foam, so that the little mermaid did not feel the chill of death. She saw the bright sun, and above her floated hundreds of beauteous ethereal beings, through which she could see the white ship and the rosy heavens. Their voices were melodious, but so spirit-like that no human ear could hear them, any more than the earthly eye could see their forms. Light as bubbles they floated through the air without the aid of wings. The little mermaid perceived that she had a form like theirs. It gradually took shape out of the foam. "To whom am I coming?" she said, and her voice sounded like that of the other beings, so unearthly in its beauty that no music of ours could reproduce it. "To the daughters of the air," answered the others. "A mermaid has no undying soul, and can never gain one without winning the love of a human being. Her eternal life must depend upon an unknown power, nor have the daughters of the air an everlasting soul, but by their own good deeds they may create one for themselves. We fly to the tropics, where mankind is the victim of hot and pestilent winds. There we bring cooling breezes. We diffuse the scent of flowers all around, and bring refreshment and healing in our train. When, for 300 years, we have laboured to do all the good in our power, we gain an undying soul and take a part in the everlasting joys of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have with your whole heart struggled for the same thing as we have struggled for. You have suffered and endured, raised yourself to the spirit world of the air, and now, by your own good deeds, you may, in the course of 300 years, work out for yourself an undying soul." Then the little mermaid lifted her transparent arms towards God's Son, and for the first time shed tears. On board ship all was again life and bustle. She saw the prince with his lovely bride searching for her. They looked sadly at the bubbling foam, as if they knew that she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the bride on her brow, smiled at the prince, and rose aloft with the other spirits of the air to the rosy clouds which sailed above. "In 300 years we shall thus float into paradise." "We might reach it sooner," whispered one. "Unseen we flit into those homes of men where there are children, and for every day that we find a good child, who gives pleasure to its parents and deserves their love, God shortens our time of probation. The child does not know when we fly through the room, and when we smile with pleasure at it, 1 year of our 300 is taken away. But if we see a naughty or badly disposed child, we cannot help shedding tears of sorrow, and every tear adds a day to the time of our probation." The end of The Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Miss Brill from The Garden Party and Other Stories by Catherine Mansfield. Although it was so brilliantly fine, the blue sky powdered with gold and great spots of light like white wine splashed over the Jardin Public, Miss Brill was glad that she had decided on her fur. The air was motionless, but when you opened your mouth there was just a faint chill, like a chill from a glass of iced water before you sip, and now and again a leaf came drifting, from nowhere, from the sky. Miss Brill put up her hand and touched her fur. Dear little thing! It was nice to feel it again. She had taken it out of its box that afternoon, shaken out the moth powder, given it a good brush, and rubbed the life back into the dim little eyes. "What has been happening to me?" said the sad little eyes. Oh, how sweet it was to see them snap at her again from the red eiderdown. But the nose, which was of some black composition, wasn't at all firm. It must have had a knock somehow. Never mind, a little dab of black sealing wax when the time came, when it was absolutely necessary. Little rogue. Yes, she really felt like that about it. Little rogue biting its tail just by her left ear. She could have taken it off and laid it on her lap and stroked it. She felt a tingling in her hands and arms, but that came from walking, she supposed. And when she breathed, something light and sad, no, not sad exactly, something gentle seemed to move in her bosom. There were a number of people out this afternoon, far more than last Sunday, and the band sounded louder and gayer. That was because the season had begun, for although the band played all the year round on Sundays, out of season it was never the same. It was like someone playing with only the family to listen. It didn't care how it played if there weren't any strangers present. Wasn't the conductor wearing a new coat, too? She was sure it was new. He scraped with his foot and flapped his arms like a rooster about to crow, and the bandsmen sitting in the green rotunda blew out their cheeks and glared at the music. Now there came a little fluty bit, very pretty, a little chain of bright drops. She was sure it would be repeated. It was. She lifted her head and smiled. Only 2 people shared her special seat, a fine old man in a velvet coat, his hands clasped over a huge carved walking stick, and a big old woman sitting upright with a roll of knitting on her embroidered apron. They did not speak. This was disappointing, for Miss Brill always looked forward to the conversation. She had become really quite expert, she thought, at listening as though she didn't listen, at sitting in other people's lives just for a minute while they talked around her. She glanced sideways at the old couple. Perhaps they would go soon. Last Sunday, too, hadn't been as interesting as usual. An Englishman and his wife, he wearing a dreadful Panama hat, and she button boots. And she'd gone on the whole time about how she ought to wear spectacles. She knew she needed them, but that it was no good getting any, they'd be sure to break, and they'd never keep on. And he had been so patient. He'd suggested everything, gold rims, the kind that curved round your ears, little pads inside the bridge. No, nothing would please her. "They'll always be sliding down my nose." Miss Brill had wanted to shake her. The old people sat on the bench, still as statues. Never mind, there was always the crowd to watch. To and fro in front of the flower beds in the band rotunda, the couples and groups paraded, stopped to talk, to greet, to buy a handful of flowers from the old beggar who had his tray fixed to the railings. Little children ran among them, swooping and laughing. Little boys with big white silk bows under their chins, little girls, little French dolls dressed up in velvet and lace. And sometimes a tiny staggerer suddenly came rocking into the open from under the trees, stopped, stared, as suddenly sat down, flop, until its small, high-stepping mother, like a young hen, rushed scolding to its rescue. Other people sat on the benches and green chairs, but they were nearly always the same, Sunday after Sunday, and, Miss Brill had often noticed, there was something funny about nearly all of them. They were odd, silent, nearly all old, and from the way they stared they looked as though they'd just come from dark little rooms, or even cupboards. Behind the rotunda, the slender trees with yellow leaves down drooping, and through them just a line of sea, and beyond the blue sky with gold-veined clouds. Tum-tum-tum, tiddle-um, tiddle-um, tum-tiddly-um, tum-ta, blew the band. 2 young girls in red came by, and 2 young soldiers in blue met them, and they laughed and paired and went off arm in arm. 2 peasant women with funny straw hats passed gravely, leading beautiful smoke-colored donkeys. A cold, pale nun hurried by. A beautiful woman came along and dropped her bunch of violets, and a little boy ran after to hand them to her, and she took them and threw them away as if they'd been poisoned. Dear me! Miss Brill didn't know whether to admire that or not. And now an ermine toque and a gentleman in grey met just in front of her. He was tall, stiff, dignified, and she was wearing the ermine toque she'd bought when her hair was yellow. Now everything, her hair, her face, even her eyes, were the same colour as the shabby ermine, and her hand in its cleaned glove, lifted to dab her lips, was a tiny yellowish paw. Oh, she was so pleased to see him, delighted. She rather thought that they were going to meet that afternoon. She described where she'd been, everywhere, here, there, along by the sea. The day was so charming. Didn't he agree? And wouldn't he perhaps... But he shook his head, lighted a cigarette, slowly breathed a great deep puff into her face, and even while she was still talking and laughing, flicked the match away and walked on. The ermine toque was alone. She smiled more brightly than ever. But even the band seemed to know what she was feeling, and played more softly, more tenderly. And the drum beat, the brute, over and over. What would she do? What was going to happen now? But as Miss Brill wondered, the ermine toque turned, raised her hand as though she'd seen someone else, much nicer, just over there, and pattered away. And the band changed again, and played more quickly, more gaily than ever, and the old couple on Miss Brill's seat got up and marched away, and such a funny old man with long whiskers hobbled along in time to the music, and was nearly knocked over by 4 girls walking abreast. How fascinating it was! How she enjoyed it! How she loved sitting here watching it all! It was like a play. It was exactly like a play. Who could believe the sky at the back wasn't painted? But it wasn't till a little brown dog trotted on solemn, and then slowly trotted off, like a little theatre dog, a dog that had been drugged, that Miss Brill discovered what it was that made it so exciting. They were all on the stage. They weren't only the audience, not only looking on, they were acting. Even she had a part and came every Sunday. No doubt somebody would have noticed if she hadn't been there. She was part of the performance after all. How strange she'd never thought of it like that before. And yet it explained why she made such a point of starting from home at just the same time each week, so as not to be late for the performance. And it also explained why she had a queer, shy feeling at telling her English pupils how she spent her Sunday afternoons. No wonder. Miss Brill nearly laughed out loud. She was on the stage. She thought of the old invalid gentleman, to whom she read the newspaper 4 afternoons a week while he slept in the garden. She had got quite used to the frail head on the cotton pillow, the hollowed eyes, the open mouth, and the high-pinched nose. If he'd been dead, she mightn't have noticed for weeks. She wouldn't have minded. But suddenly he knew he was having the paper read to him by an actress. An actress? The old head lifted. 2 points of light quivered in the old eyes. An actress, are you? And Miss Brill smoothed the newspaper, as though it were the manuscript of her part, and said gently, "Yes, I have been an actress for a long time." The band had been having a rest. Now they started again, and what they played was warm, sunny, yet there was just a faint chill, a something. What was it? Not sadness. No, not sadness. Something that made you want to sing. The tune lifted, the light shone, and it seemed to Miss Brill that in another moment all of them, all the whole company, would begin singing. The young ones, the laughing ones who were moving together, they would begin, and the men's voices, very resolute and brave, would join them. And then she too, and the others on the benches, they would come in with a kind of accompaniment, something low that scarcely rose or fell, something so beautiful, moving. And Miss Brill's eyes filled with tears, and she looked smiling at all the other members of the company. Yes, we understand. We understand, she thought, though what they understood she didn't know. Just at that moment a boy and a girl came and sat down where the old couple had been. They were beautifully dressed. They were in love. The hero and heroine, of course, just arrived from his father's yacht, and still soundlessly singing, still with that trembling smile, Miss Brill prepared to listen. "No, not now," said the girl. "Not here. I can't." "But why? Because of that stupid old thing at the end there?" asked the boy. "Why does she come here at all? Who wants her? Why doesn't she keep her silly old mug at home?" "It's her fur, which is so funny," giggled the girl. "It's exactly like a fried whiting." "Ugh, be off with you," said the boy in an angry whisper. Then, "Tell me, ma petite chère." "No, not here," said the girl. "Not yet." On her way home, she usually bought a slice of honey cake at the baker's. It was her Sunday treat. Sometimes there was an almond in her slice, sometimes not. It made a great difference. If there was an almond, it was like carrying home a tiny present, a surprise, something that very well might not have been there. She hurried on the almond Sundays, and struck the match for the kettle in quite a dashing way. But today she passed the baker's by, climbed the stairs, went into the little dark room, her room like a cupboard, and sat down on the red eiderdown. She sat there for a long time. The box that the fur came out of was on the bed. She unclasped the necklet quickly, without looking, laid it inside. But when she put the lid on, she thought she heard something crying. This is the end of Miss Brill from The Garden Party and Other Stories by Catherine Mansfield.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by West Winds 12. In China, as you know, the emperor is a Chinaman, and all the people around him are Chinamen too. It is many years since the story I am going to tell you happened, but that is all the more reason for telling it. lest it should be forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most beautiful thing in the world. It was made entirely of the finest porcelain, very costly, but at the same time so fragile that it could only be touched with the very greatest care. There were the most extraordinary flowers to be seen in the garden. The most beautiful ones had little silver bells tied to them, which tinkled perpetually, so that one should not pass the flowers without looking at them. Every little detail in the garden had been most carefully thought out, and it was so big that even the gardener himself did not know where it ended. If one went on walking, one came to beautiful woods with lofty trees and deep lakes. The wood extended to the sea, which was deep and blue, deep enough for large ships to sail up right under the branches of the trees. Among these trees lived a nightingale, which sang so deliciously that even the poor fisherman, who had plenty of other things to do, lay still to listen to it. When he was out at night drawing in his nets, "Heavens, how beautiful it is!" he said, but then he had to attend to his business and forgot it. The next night, when he heard it again, he would again exclaim, "Heavens, how beautiful it is!" Travellers came to the emperor's capital from every country in the world. They admired everything very much, especially the palace and the gardens. But when they heard the nightingale, they all said, "This is better than anything." When they got home, they described it, and the learned ones wrote many books about the town, the palace, and the garden. But nobody forgot the nightingale. It was always put above everything else. Those among them who were poets wrote the most beautiful poems, all about the nightingale in the woods by the deep blue sea. These books went all over the world, and in course of time some of them reached the emperor. He sat in his golden chair, reading and nodding his head, well pleased to hear such beautiful descriptions of the town, the palace, and the garden. "But the nightingale is the best of all," he read. "What is this?" said the emperor. "The nightingale? Why, I know nothing about it. Is there such a bird in my kingdom, and in my own garden into the bargain, and I have never heard it? Imagine my having to discover this from a book." Then he called his gentleman in waiting, who was so grand that when any one of a lower rank dared to speak to him, or to ask him a question, he would only answer "P," which means nothing at all. "There is said to be a very wonderful bird called a nightingale here," said the emperor. "They say that it is better than anything else in all my great kingdom. Why have I never been told anything about it?" "I have never heard it mentioned," said the gentleman in waiting. "It has never been presented at court. I wish it to appear here this evening to sing to me," said the emperor. "The whole world knows what I am possessed of, and I know nothing about it." "I have never heard it mentioned before," said the gentleman in waiting. "I will seek it, I will find it." But where was it to be found? The gentleman in waiting ran upstairs and downstairs and in and out of all the rooms and corridors. No one of all those he met had ever heard anything about the nightingale. So the gentleman in waiting ran back to the emperor and said that it must be a myth, invented by the writers of the books. "Your Imperial Majesty must not believe everything that is written. Books are often mere inventions, even if they do not belong to what we call the black art. But the book in which I read it is sent to me by the powerful Emperor of Japan, so it can't be untrue. I will hear this nightingale. I insist upon its being here tonight. I extend my most gracious protection to it, and if it is not forthcoming, I will have the whole court trampled upon after supper." "Sing pei," said the gentleman in waiting, and away he ran again, up and down all the stairs, in and out of all the rooms and corridors. Half the court ran with him, for they none of them wished to be trampled on. There was much questioning about this nightingale, which was known to all the outside world, but to no one at court. At last they found a poor little maid in the kitchen. She said, "Oh heavens, the nightingale! I know it very well. Yes, indeed it can sing. Every evening I am allowed to take broken meat to my poor sick mother. She lives down by the shore. On my way back, when I am tired, I rest a while in the wood, and then I hear the nightingale. Its song brings the tears into my eyes. I feel as if my mother were kissing me." "Little kitchen maid," said the gentleman in waiting, "I will procure you a permanent position in the kitchen, and permission to see the emperor dining, if you will take us to the nightingale. It is commanded to appear at court to-night." Then they all went out into the wood where the nightingale usually sang. Half the court was there. As they were going along at their best pace, a cow began to bellow. "Oh," said a young courtier, "there we have it! What wonderful power for such a little creature! I have certainly heard it before." "No, those are the cows bellowing. We are a long way yet from the place." Then the frogs began to croak in the marsh. "Beautiful!" said the Chinese chaplain. "It is just like the tinkling of church bells." "No, those are frogs," said the little kitchen maid, "but I think we shall soon hear it now." Then the nightingale began to sing. "There it is," said the little girl. "Listen, listen! There it sits!" And she pointed to a little grey bird up among the branches. "Is it possible?" said the gentleman in waiting. "I should never have thought it was like that. How common it looks! Seeing so many grand people must have frightened all its colours away." "Little nightingale," called the kitchen maid, quite loud, "our gracious emperor wishes you to sing to him." "With the greatest of pleasure," said the nightingale, warbling away in the most delightful fashion. "It is just like crystal bells," said the gentleman in waiting. "Look at its little throat, how active it is! It is extraordinary that we have never heard it before. I am sure it will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing again to the emperor?" said the nightingale, who thought he was present. "My precious little nightingale," said the gentleman in waiting, "I have the honour to command your attendance at a court festival to-night, where you will charm his gracious majesty the emperor with your fascinating singing." "It sounds best among the trees," said the nightingale, but it went with them willingly when it heard that the emperor wished it. The palace had been brightened up for the occasion. The walls and the floors, which were all of china, shone by the light of many thousand golden lamps. The most beautiful flowers, all of the tinkling kind, were arranged in the corridors. There was hurrying to and fro, and a great draught, but this was just what made the bells ring. One's ears were full of the tinkling. In the middle of the large reception room where the emperor sat a golden rod had been fixed, on which the nightingale was to perch. The whole court was assembled, and the little kitchen maid had been permitted to stand behind the door, as she now had the actual title of cook. They were all dressed in their best. Everybody's eyes were turned toward the little grey bird at which the emperor was nodding. The nightingale sang delightfully, and the tears came into the emperor's eyes, nay, they rolled down his cheeks. And then the nightingale sang more beautifully than ever. Its notes touched all hearts. The emperor was charmed, and said the nightingale should have his gold slipper to wear around its neck, but the nightingale declined with thanks. It had already been sufficiently rewarded. "I have seen tears in the eyes of the emperor. That is my richest reward. The tears of an emperor have a wonderful power. God knows I am sufficiently recompensed." And then it again burst into its sweet, heavenly song. "That is the most delightful coquetting I've ever seen," said the ladies, and they took some water into their mouths to try and make the same gurgling when any one spoke to them, thinking so to equal the nightingale. Even the lackeys and the chambermaids announced that they were satisfied, and that is saying a great deal. They are always the most difficult people to please. Yes, indeed, the nightingale had been a sensation. It was to stay at court now, and to have its own cage, as well as liberty to walk out twice a day, and once in the night. It always had 12 footmen, with each one holding a ribbon which was tied around its leg. There was not much pleasure in an outing of that sort. The whole town talked about the marvellous bird, and if two people met, one said to the other, "Night," and the other answered, "Gale," and then they sighed, perfectly understanding each other. 11 cheesemongers' children were called after it, but they had not got a voice among them. One day a large parcel came from the emperor. Outside was written the word Nightingale. "Here we have another new book about this celebrated bird," said the emperor, but it was no book, it was a little work of art, in a box, an artificial nightingale, exactly like the living one, but it was studded all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When the bird was wound up, it could sing one of the songs the real one sang, and it wagged its tail, which glittered with silver and gold. A ribbon was tied around its neck, on which was written, "The Emperor of Japan's nightingale is very poor compared to the Emperor of China's." Everybody said, "Oh, how beautiful!" and the person who brought the artificial bird immediately received the title of Imperial Nightingale Carrier in Chief. Now they must sing together. What a duet that will be! Then they had to sing together, but they did not get on very well, for the real nightingale sang in its own way, and the artificial one could only sing waltzes. "There is no fault in that," said the music master. "It is perfectly in time and correct in every way." Then the artificial bird had to sing alone. It was just as great a success as the real one, and then it was so much prettier to look at. It glittered like bracelets and breastpins. It sang the same tune 33 times over, and yet it was not tired. People would willingly have heard it from the beginning again, but the emperor said that the real one must have a turn now. But where was it? No one had noticed that it had flown out of the open window, back to its own green woods. "But what is the meaning of this?" said the emperor. All the courtiers railed at it, and said it was the most ungrateful bird. "We have got the best bird, though," said they, and then the artificial bird had to sing again, and this was the 34th time that they heard the same tune, but they did not know it thoroughly even yet, because it was so difficult. The music master praised the bird tremendously, and insisted that it was much better than the real nightingale, not only as regarded the outside, with all the diamonds, but the inside too. "Because, you see, my ladies and gentlemen, and the emperor before all, in the real nightingale you never know what you will hear, but in the artificial one everything is decided beforehand. So it is, and so it must remain. It can't be otherwise. You can account for things, you can open it and show the human ingenuity in arranging the waltzes, how they go and how one note follows upon another." "Those are exactly my opinions," they all said, and the music master got leave to show the bird to the public next Sunday. They were also to hear it sing, said the emperor. So they heard it, and all became as enthusiastic over it as if they had drunk themselves merry on tea, because that is a thoroughly Chinese habit. Then they all said "Oh!" and stuck their forefingers in the air and nodded their heads, but the poor fisherman who had heard the real nightingale said, "It sounds very nice, and it is very like the real one, but there is something wanting, we don't know what. The real nightingale was banished from the kingdom." The artificial bird had its place on a silken cushion, close to the emperor's bed. All the presents it had received of gold and precious jewels were scattered around it. Its title had risen to Chief Imperial Singer of the Bedchamber, in rank number 1, on the left side, for the emperor reckoned that side the important one, where the heart was seated, and even an emperor's heart is on the left side. The music master wrote 25 volumes about the artificial bird. The treatise was very long, and written in all the most difficult Chinese characters. Everybody said they had read and understood it, for otherwise they would have been reckoned stupid, and then their bodies would have been trampled upon. Things went on in this way for a whole year. The emperor, the court, and all the other Chinamen knew every little gurgle in the song of the artificial bird by heart. But they liked it all the better for this, and they could all join in the song themselves. Even the street boys sang zizzy, 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 and cluck, 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 and the emperor sang it too. But one evening when the bird was singing its best, and the emperor was lying in bed listening to it, something gave way inside the bird with a zwizz. Then a spring burst. Whirr! Went all the wheels, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped out of bed and sent for his private physicians, but what good could they do? Then they sent for the watchmaker, and after a good deal of talk and examination he got the works to go again somehow, but he said it would have to be saved as much as possible because it was so worn out, and he could not renew the works so as to be sure of the tune. This was a great blow. They only dared to let the artificial bird sing once a year, and hardly that. But then the music master made a little speech, using all the most difficult words. He said it was just as good as ever, and his saying it made it so. 5 years now passed, and then a great grief came upon the nation, for they were all very fond of their emperor, and he was ill, and could not live, it was said. A new emperor was already chosen, and people stood about in the street and asked the gentleman in waiting how their emperor was going on. "P," answered he, shaking his head. The emperor lay pale and cold in his gorgeous bed. The courtiers thought he was dead, and they all went off to pay their respects to the new emperor. The lackeys ran off to talk matters over, and the chambermaids gave a great coffee party. Cloth had been laid down in all the rooms and corridors so as to deaden the sound of footsteps, so it was very, very quiet. But the emperor was not dead yet. He lay stiff and pale in the gorgeous bed with its velvet hangings and heavy golden tassels. There was an open window high above him, and the moon streamed in upon the emperor and the artificial bird beside him. The poor emperor could hardly breathe. He seemed to have a weight on his chest. He opened his eyes, and then he saw that it was Death sitting upon his chest, wearing his golden crown. In one hand he held the emperor's golden sword, and in the other his imperial banner. Round about, from among the folds of the velvet hangings, peered many curious faces. Some were hideous, others gentle and pleasant. They were all the emperor's good and bad deeds, which now looked him in the face when death was weighing him down. "Do you remember that?" whispered one after the other. "Do you remember this?" And they told him so many things that the perspiration poured down his face. "I never knew that," said the emperor. "Music, music, sound the great Chinese drums," he cried, "that I may not hear what they are saying." But they went on, and Death sat nodding his head, just like a Chinaman, at everything that was said. "Music, music!" shrieked the emperor. "You precious little golden bird, sing, sing! I have loaded you with precious stones, and even hung my own golden slipper around your neck. Sing, I tell you, sing!" But the bird stood silent. There was nobody to wind it up, so of course it could not go. Death continued to fix the great empty sockets of his eyes upon him, and all was silent, so terribly silent. Suddenly, close to the window, there was a burst of lovely song. It was the living nightingale perched on a branch outside. It had heard of the emperor's need, and had come to bring comfort and hope to him. As it sang, the faces around became fainter and fainter, and the blood coursed with fresh vigour in the emperor's veins, and through his feeble limbs. Even Death himself listened to the song, and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on." "Yes, if you give me the gorgeous golden sword, yes, if you give me the imperial banner, yes, if you give me the emperor's crown." And Death gave back each of these treasures for a song, and the nightingale went on singing. It sang about the quiet churchyard when the roses bloom, where the elder flowers scent the air, and where the fresh grass is ever moistened anew by the tears of the mourner. This song brought to Death a longing for his own garden, and like a cold grey mist he passed out of the window. "Thanks, thanks," said the emperor, "you heavenly little bird. I know you. I banished you from my kingdom, and yet you have charmed the evil visions away from my bed by your song, and even death away from my heart. How can I ever repay you?" "You have rewarded me," said the nightingale. "I brought the tears to your eyes, the very first time I ever sang to you, and I shall never forget it. Those are the jewels which gladden the heart of a singer. But sleep now, and wake up fresh and strong. I will sing to you." Then it sang again, and the emperor fell into a sweet, refreshing sleep. The sun shone in at his window. When he woke refreshed and well, none of his attendants had yet come back to him, for they thought he was dead. But the nightingale still sat there singing. "You must always stay with me," said the emperor. "You shall only sing when you like, and I will break the artificial bird into 1,000 pieces." "Don't do that," said the nightingale. "It did all the good it could. Keep it, as you have always done. I can't build my nest and live in this palace, but let me come whenever I like. Then I will sit on the branch in the evening and sing to you. I will sing to cheer you and to make you thoughtful too. I will sing to you of the happy ones, and of those that suffer too, and I will sing about the good and the evil, which are kept hidden from you. The little singing bird flies far and wide, to the poor fisherman and the peasant's home, to numbers who are far from you and your court. I love your heart more than your crown, and yet there is an odour of sanctity around the crown too. I will come, and I will sing to you, but you must promise me one thing." "Everything," said the emperor, who stood there in his imperial robes which he had just put on, and he held the sword heavy with gold upon his heart. "One thing I ask you. Tell no one that you have a little bird who tells you everything. It will be better so." Then the nightingale flew away. The attendants came in to see after their dead emperor, and there he stood, bidding them good morning. The end of The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Today's reading by Stephen Parker. An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. A man stood upon a railroad bridge in northern Alabama, looking down into the swift water 20 feet below. The man's hands were behind his back, the wrists bound with a cord. A rope closely encircled his neck. It was attached to a stout cross-timber above his head, and the slack fell to the level of his knees. Some loose boards laid upon the ties supporting the rails of the railway supplied a footing for him and his executioners, 2 private soldiers of the Federal Army, directed by a sergeant who in civil life may have been a deputy sheriff. At a short remove upon the same temporary platform was an officer in the uniform of his rank, armed. He was a captain. A sentinel at each end of the bridge stood with his rifle in the position known as support, that is to say, vertical in front of the left shoulder, the hammer resting on the forearm thrown straight across the chest, a formal and unnatural position enforcing an erect carriage of the body. It did not appear to be the duty of these 2 men to know what was occurring at the center of the bridge. They merely blockaded the 2 ends of the foot planking that traversed it. Beyond one of the sentinels, nobody was in sight. The railroad ran straight away into a forest for 100 yards, then, curving, was lost to view. Doubtless there was an outpost further along. The other bank of the stream was open ground, a gentle slope topped with a stockade of vertical tree trunks loopholed for rifles, with a single embrasure through which protruded the muzzle of a brass cannon commanding the bridge. Midway up the slope between the bridge and the fort were the spectators, a single company of infantry in line, at parade rest, the butts of their rifles on the ground, the barrels inclining slightly backward against the right shoulder, the hands crossed upon the stock. A lieutenant stood at the right of the line, the point of his sword upon the ground, his left hand resting upon his right. Excepting the group of four at the center of the bridge, not a man moved. The company faced the bridge, staring stonily, motionless. The sentinels, facing the banks of the stream, might have been statues to adorn the bridge. The captain stood with folded arms, silent, observing the work of his subordinates, but making no sign. Death is a dignitary who, when he comes announced, is to be received with formal manifestations of respect, even by those most familiar with him. In the code of military etiquette, silence and fixity are forms of deference. The man who was engaged in being hanged was apparently about 35 years of age. He was a civilian, if one might judge from his habit, which was that of a planter. His features were good, a straight nose, firm mouth, broad forehead, from which his long dark hair was combed straight back, falling behind his ears to the collar of his well-fitting frock coat. He wore a moustache and pointed beard, but no whiskers. His eyes were large and dark grey, and had a kindly expression which one would hardly have expected in one whose neck was in the hemp. Evidently, this was no vulgar assassin. The liberal military code makes provision for hanging many kinds of persons, and gentlemen are not excluded. The preparations being complete, the two private soldiers stepped aside, and each drew away the plank upon which he had been standing. The sergeant turned to the captain, saluted, and placed himself immediately behind that officer, who in turn moved apart one pace. These movements left the condemned man and the sergeant standing on the two ends of the same plank, which spanned three of the cross ties of the bridge. The end upon which the civilian stood almost, but not quite, reached a fourth. This plank had been held in place by the weight of the captain. It was now held by that of the sergeant. At a signal from the former, the latter would step aside, the plank would tilt, and the condemned man go down between two ties. The arrangement commended itself to his judgment as simple and effective. His face had not been covered, nor his eyes bandaged. He looked a moment at his unsteadfast footing, then let his gaze wander to the swirling water of the stream racing madly beneath his feet. A piece of dancing driftwood caught his attention, and his eyes followed it down the current. How slowly it appeared to move! What a sluggish stream! He closed his eyes in order to fix his last thoughts upon his wife and children. The water, touched to gold by the early sun, the brooding mists under the banks at some distance down the stream, the fort, the soldiers, the piece of drift, all had distracted him, and now he became conscious of a new disturbance. Striking through the thought of his dear ones was sound which he could neither ignore nor understand, a sharp, distinct metallic percussion like the stroke of a blacksmith's hammer upon the anvil. It had the same ringing quality. He wondered what it was, and whether immeasurably distant or nearby. It seemed both. Its recurrence was regular, but as slow as the tolling of a death knell. He awaited each new stroke with impatience, and, he knew not why, apprehension. The intervals of silence grew progressively longer, the delays became maddening. With their greater infrequency the sounds increased in strength and sharpness. They hurt his ear like the thrust of a knife. He feared he would shriek. What he heard was the ticking of his watch. He unclosed his eyes and saw again the water below him. If I could free my hands, he thought, I might throw off the noose and spring into the stream. By diving I could evade the bullets, and swimming vigorously reach the bank, take to the woods and get away home. My home, thank God, is as yet outside their lines. My wife and little ones are still beyond the invaders' farthest advance. As these thoughts, which have here to be set down in words, were flashed into the doomed man's brain rather than evolved from it, the captain nodded to the sergeant. The sergeant stepped aside. 2. Peyton Farquhar was a well-to-do planter, of an old and highly respected Alabama family. Being a slave owner, and like other slave owners a politician, he was naturally an original secessionist, and ardently devoted to the Southern cause. Circumstances of an imperious nature, which it is unnecessary to relate here, had prevented him from taking service with that gallant army which had fought the disastrous campaigns ending with the fall of Corinth, and he chafed under the inglorious restraint, longing for the release of his energies, the larger life of the soldier, the opportunity for distinction. That opportunity, he felt, would come, as it comes to all in wartime. Meanwhile, he did what he could. No service was too humble for him to perform in the aid of the South, no adventure too perilous for him to undertake, if consistent with the character of a civilian who was at heart a soldier, and who in good faith and without too much qualification assented to at least a part of the frankly villainous dictum that all is fair in love and war. One evening, while Farquhar and his wife were sitting on a rustic bench near the entrance to his grounds, a grey-clad soldier rode up to the gate and asked for a drink of water. Mrs. Farquhar was only too happy to serve him with her own white hands. While she was fetching the water, her husband approached the dusty horseman and inquired eagerly for news from the front. "The Yanks are repairing the railroads," said the man, "and are getting ready for another advance. They have reached the Owl Creek Bridge, put it under order, and built a stockade on the north bank. The commandant has issued an order, which is posted everywhere, declaring that any civilian caught interfering with the railroad, its bridges, tunnels, or trains will be summarily hanged. I saw the order." "How far is it to the Owl Creek Bridge?" Farquhar asked. "About 30 miles. "Is there no force on this side of the creek?" "Only a picket post half a mile out on the railroad, and a single sentinel at this end of the bridge." "Suppose a man, a civilian and student of hanging, should elude the picket post and perhaps get the better of the sentinel," said Farquhar, smiling. "What could he accomplish?" The soldier reflected. "I was there a month ago," he replied. "I observed that the flood of last winter had lodged a great quantity of driftwood against the wooden pier at this end of the bridge. It is now dry, and would burn like tinder." The lady had now brought the water, which the soldier drank. He thanked her ceremoniously, bowed to her husband, and rode away. An hour later, after nightfall, he repassed the plantation, going northward in the direction from which he had come. He was a Federal scout. 3. As Peyton Farquhar fell straight downward through the bridge, he lost consciousness, and was as one already dead. From this state he was awakened, ages later it seemed to him, by the pain of a sharp pressure upon his throat, followed by a sense of suffocation. Keen, poignant agonies seemed to shoot from his neck downward through every fibre of his body and limbs. These pains appeared to flash upon well-defined lines of ramification, and to beat with an inconceivably rapid periodicity. They seemed like streams of pulsating fire heating him to an intolerable temperature. As to his head, he was conscious of nothing but a feeling of fullness, of congestion. These sensations were unaccompanied by thought. The intellectual part of his nature was already effaced. He had power only to feel, and feeling was torment. He was conscious of motion. Encompassed in a luminous cloud of which he was now merely the fiery heart, without material substance, he swung through unthinkable arcs of oscillation, like a vast pendulum. Then, all at once, with terrible suddenness, the light about him shot upward with the noise of a loud splash. A frightful roaring was in his ears, and all was cold and dark. The power of thought was restored. He knew that the rope had broken, and he had fallen into the stream. There was no additional strangulation. The noose about his neck was already suffocating him, and kept the water from his lungs. To die of hanging at the bottom of a river, the idea seemed to him ludicrous. He opened his eyes in the darkness, and saw above him a gleam of light, but how distant, how inaccessible! He was still sinking, for the light became fainter and fainter until it was a mere glimmer. Then it began to grow and brighten, and he knew that he was rising towards the surface. Knew it with reluctance, for he was now very comfortable. To be hanged and drowned, he thought. That is not so bad, but I do not wish to be shot. No, I will not be shot. That is not fair. He was not conscious of an effort, but a sharp pain in his wrist surprised him that he was trying to free his hands. He gave the struggle his attention, as an idler might observe the feat of a juggler, without interest in the outcome. What splendid effort! What magnificent, what superhuman strength! Ah, that was a fine endeavour! Bravo! The cord fell away. His arms parted and floated upward, the hands dimly seen on each side in the growing light. He watched them with a new interest as first one, then the other pounced upon the noose at his neck. They tore it away and thrust it fiercely aside, its undulations resembling those of a water-snake. "Put it back! Put it back!" He thought he shouted these words to his hands, for the undoing of the noose had been succeeded by the direst pang that he had yet experienced. His neck ached horribly. His brain was on fire. His heart, which had been fluttering faintly, gave a great leap, trying to force itself out at his mouth. His whole body was racked and wrenched with an insupportable anguish, but his disobedient hands gave no heed to the command. They beat the water vigorously with quick, downward strokes, forcing him to the surface. He felt his head emerge. His eyes were blinded by the sunlight. His chest expanded convulsively, and with a supreme and crowning agony his lungs engulfed a great draught of air, which instantly he expelled in a shriek. He was now in full possession of his physical senses. They were, indeed, preternaturally keen and alert. Something in the awful disturbance of his organic system had so exalted and refined them that they made record of things never before perceived. He felt the ripples upon his face and heard their separate sounds as they struck. He looked at the forest on the bank of the stream, saw the individual trees, the leaves, and the veining of each leaf. He saw the very insects upon them, the locusts, the brilliant-bodied flies, the grey spiders stretching their webs from twig to twig. He noted the prismatic colours in all the dewdrops upon a million blades of grass, the humming of the gnats that danced above the eddies of the stream, the beating of the dragonfly's wings, the strokes of the water-spider's legs, like oars which had lifted their boat. A fish slid along beneath his eyes, and he heard the rush of its body parting the water. He had come to the surface, facing down the stream. In a moment the visible world seemed to wheel slowly round, himself the pivotal point, and he saw the bridge, the fort, the soldiers upon the bridge, the captain, the sergeant, the two privates, his executioners. They were in silhouette against the blue sky. They shouted and gesticulated, pointing at him. The captain had drawn his pistol, but did not fire. The others were unarmed. Their movements were grotesque and horrible, their forms gigantic. Suddenly he heard a sharp report, and something struck the water smartly within a few inches of his head, spattering his face with spray. He heard a second report, and saw one of the sentinels with his rifle at his shoulder, a light cloud of blue smoke rising from the muzzle. The man in the water saw the eyes of the man on the bridge gazing into his own through the sights of the rifle. He observed that it was a grey eye, and remembered having read that grey eyes were keenest, and that all famous marksmen had them. Nevertheless, this one had missed. A counter-swell had caught Farquhar and turned him half round. He was again looking at the forest on the bank opposite the fort. The sound of a clear, high voice in a monotonous sing-song now rang out behind him, and came across the water with a distinctness that pierced and subdued all other sounds, even the beating of the ripples in his ears. Although no soldier, he had frequented camps enough to know the dread significance of that deliberate, drawling, aspirated chant. The lieutenant on shore was taking a part in the morning's work. How coldly and pitilessly, with what an even, calm intonation, presaging and enforcing tranquillity in the men, with what accurately measured interval fell those cruel words. "Company, attention! Shoulder, arms! Ready! Aim! Fire!" Farquhar dived as deeply as he could. The water roared in his ears like the voice of Niagara, yet he heard the dull thunder of the volley, and rising again towards the surface, met shining bits of metal, singularly flattened, oscillating slowly downward. Some of them touched him on the face and hands, then fell away, continuing their descent. One lodged between his collar and neck. It was uncomfortably warm, and he snatched it out. As he rose to the surface, gasping for breath, he saw that he had been a long time under water. He was perceptibly farther downstream, nearer to safety. The soldiers had almost finished reloading. The metal ramrods flashed all at once in the sunshine as they were drawn from the bannels, turned in the air, and thrust in their sockets. The two sentinels fired again, independently and ineffectually. The hunted man saw all this over his shoulder. He was now swimming vigorously with the current. His brain was as energetic as his arms and legs. He thought with the rapidity of lightning. The officer, he reasoned, will not make the martinet's error a second time. It is easy to dodge a volley as a single shot. He has probably already given the command to fire at will. God help me, I cannot dodge them all. An appalling splash within 2 yards of him was followed by a loud, rushing sound, diminuendo, which seemed to travel back through the air to the fort, and died in an explosion which stirred the very river to its deeps. A rising sheet of water curved over him, fell down upon him, blinded him, strangled him. The cannon had taken an hand in the game. As he shook his head free from the commotion of the smitten water, he heard the deflected shot humming through the air ahead, and in an instant it was cracking and smashing the branches in the forest beyond. They will not do that again, he thought. The next time they will use a charge of grape. I must keep my eye upon the gun. The smoke will appraise me. The report arrives too late. It lags behind the missile. That is a good gun. Suddenly he felt himself whirled round and round, spinning like a top. The water, the banks, the forest, the now distant bridge, fort, and men, all were commingled and blurred. Objects were represented by their colours only. Circular, horizontal streaks of colour. That was all he saw. He had been caught in a vortex and was being whirled on with a velocity of advance and gyration that made him giddy and sick. In few moments he was flung upon the gravel at the foot of the left bank of the stream, the southern bank, and behind a projecting point which concealed him from his enemies. The sudden arrest of his motion, the abrasion of one of his hands on the gravel, restored him, and he wept with delight. He dug his fingers into the sand, threw it over himself in handfuls, and audibly blessed it. It looked like diamonds, rubies, emeralds. He could think of nothing beautiful which it did not resemble. The trees upon the bank were giant garden plants. He noted a definite order in their arrangement, inhaled the fragrance of their blooms. A strange roseate light shone through the spaces amongst their trunks, and the wind made in their branches the music of Aeolian harps. He had not wished to perfect his escape. He was content to remain in that enchanting spot until retaken. A whiz and rattle of grape-shot amongst the branches high above his head roused him from his dream. The baffled cannoneer had fired him a random farewell. He sprang to his feet, rushed up the sloping bank, and plunged into the forest. All that day he travelled, laying his course by the rounding sun. The forest seemed interminable. Nowhere did he discover a break in it, not even a woodman's road. He had not known that he lived in so wild a region. There was something uncanny in the revelation. By nightfall he was fatigued, footsore, famished. The thought of his wife and children urged him on. At last he found a road which led him in what he knew to be the right direction. It was as wide and straight as a city street, yet it seemed untravelled. No fields bordered it, no dwelling anywhere. Not so much as the barking of a dog suggested human habitation. The black bodies of the trees formed a straight wall on both sides, terminating on the horizon in a point, like a diagram in a lesson in perspective. Overhead, as he looked up through this rift in the wood, shone great golden stars, looking unfamiliar, and grouped in strange constellations. He was sure they were arranged in some order which had a secret and malign significance. The wood on either side was full of singular noises, among which once, twice, and again, he distinctly heard whispers in an unknown tongue. His neck was in pain, and lifting his hand to it, found it horribly swollen. He knew that it had a circle of black where the rope had bruised it. His eyes felt congested. He could no longer close them. His tongue was swollen with thirst. He relieved its fever by thrusting it forward from between his teeth into the cold air. How softly the turf had carpeted this untravelled avenue! He could no longer feel the roadway beneath his feet. Doubtless, despite his suffering, he had fallen asleep while walking, for now he sees another scene. Perhaps he is merely recovered from a delirium. He stands at the gate of his own home. All is as he left it, and all bright and beautiful in the morning sunshine. He must have travelled the entire night. As he pushes open the gate and passes up the wide white walk, he sees a flutter of female garments. His wife, looking fresh and cool and sweet, steps down from the veranda to meet him. At the bottom of the steps she stands waiting with a smile of ineffable joy, an attitude of matchless grace and dignity. Ah, how beautiful she is! He springs forward with extended arms. As he is about to clasp her, he feels a stunning blow upon the back of the neck. A blinding white light blazes all around him with a sound like the shock of a cannon. Then all is darkness and silence. Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body, with a broken neck, swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of the Owl Creek Bridge. And that's the end of Owl Creek by Ambrose Bierce.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read and recorded by William Kuhn, September 2006. The Outcasts of Poker Flat by Bret Harte. As Mr. John Oakhurst, gambler, stepped into the main street of Poker Flat on the morning of the 23rd of November, 1850, he was conscious of a change in its moral atmosphere since the preceding night. 2 or 3 men, conversing earnestly together, ceased as he approached, and exchanged significant glances. There was a Sabbath lull in the air which, in a settlement unused to Sabbath influences, looked ominous. Mr. Oakhurst's calm, handsome face betrayed small concern in these indications. Whether he was conscious of any predisposing cause was another question. "I reckon they're after somebody," he reflected. "Likely it's me." He returned to his pocket the handkerchief with which he had been whipping away the red dust of Poker Flat from his neat boots, and quietly discharged his mind of any further conjecture. In point of fact, Poker Flat was after somebody. It had lately suffered the loss of several $1,000s, 2 valuable horses, and a prominent citizen. It was experiencing a spasm of virtuous reaction, quite as lawless and ungovernable as any of the acts that had provoked it. A secret committee had determined to rid the town of all improper persons. This was done permanently in regard to 2 men who were then hanging from the boughs of a sycamore in the gulch, and temporarily in the banishment of certain other objectionable characters. I regret to say that some of these were ladies. It is but due to the sex, however, to state that their impropriety was professional, and it was only in such easily established standards of evil that Poker Flat ventured to sit in judgment. Mr. Oakhurst was right in supposing that he was included in this category. A few of the committee had urged hanging him as a possible example, and a sure method of reimbursing themselves from his pockets of the sums he had won from them. "It's agin justice," said Jim Wheeler, "to let this yer young man from Roaring Camp, an entire stranger, carry away our money." But a crude sentiment of equity residing in the breasts of those who had been fortunate enough to win from Mr. Oakhurst overruled this narrower local prejudice. Mr. Oakhurst received his sentence with philosophic calmness, none the less coolly that he was aware of the hesitation of his judges. He was too much of a gambler not to accept fate. With him life was at best an uncertain game, and he recognized the usual percentage in favor of the dealer. A body of armed men accompanied the deported wickedness of Poker Flat to the outskirts of the settlement. Besides Mr. Oakhurst, who was known to be a coolly desperate man, and for whose intimidation the armed escort was intended, the expatriated party consisted of a young woman familiarly known as the Duchess, another who had won the title of Mother Shipton, and Uncle Billy, a suspected sluice robber and confirmed drunkard. The cavalcade provoked no comments from the spectators, nor was any word uttered by the escort. Only, when the gulch which marked the uttermost limit of Poker Flat was reached, the leader spoke briefly and to the point. The exiles were forbidden to return at the peril of their lives. As the escort disappeared, their pent-up feelings found vent in a few hysterical tears from the Duchess, some bad language from Mother Shipton, and a Parthian volley of expletives from Uncle Billy. The philosophic Oakhurst alone remained silent. He listened calmly to Mother Shipton's desire to cut somebody's heart out, to the repeated statements of the Duchess that she would die in the road, and to the alarming oaths that seemed to be bumped out of Uncle Billy as he rode forward. With the easy good humor characteristic of his class, he insisted upon exchanging his own riding horse, Five Spot, for the sorry mule which the Duchess rode. But even this act did not draw the party into any closer sympathy. The young woman readjusted her somewhat draggled plumes with a feeble, faded coquetry. Mother Shipton eyed the possessor of Five Spot with malevolence, and Uncle Billy included the whole party in one sweeping anathema. The road to Sandy Bar, a camp that, not having as yet experienced the regenerating influences of Poker Flat, consequently seemed to offer some invitation to the emigrants, lay over a steep mountain range. It was distant a day's severe travel. In that advanced season the party soon passed out of the moist, temperate regions of the foothills into the dry, cold, bracing air of the Sierras. The trail was narrow and difficult. At noon the Duchess, rolling out of her saddle upon the ground, declared her intention of going no farther, and the party halted. The spot was singularly wild and impressive, a wooded amphitheatre surrounded on three sides by precipitous cliffs of naked granite, sloped gently toward the crest of another precipice that overlooked the valley. It was undoubtedly the most suitable spot for a camp, had camping been advisable, but Mr. Oakhurst knew that scarcely half the journey to Sandy Bar was accomplished, and the party were not equipped or provisioned for delay. This fact he pointed out to his companions curtly, with a philosophic commentary on the folly of throwing up their hands before the game was played out. But they were furnished with liquor, which in this emergency stood them in place of food, fuel, rest, and prescience. In spite of his remonstrances, it was not long before they were more or less under its influence. Uncle Billy passed rapidly from a bellicose state into one of stupor. The Duchess became maudlin, and Mother Shipton snored. Mr. Oakhurst alone remained erect, leaning against a rock, calmly surveying them. Mr. Oakhurst did not drink. It interfered with a profession which required coolness, impassiveness, and presence of mind, and, in his own language, he couldn't afford it. As he gazed at his recumbent fellow exiles, the loneliness begotten of his pariah trade, his habits of life, his very vices, for the first time seriously oppressed him. He bestirred himself in dusting his black clothes, washing his hands and face, and other acts characteristic of his studiously neat habits, and for a moment forgot his annoyance. The thought of deserting his weaker and more pitiable companions never perhaps occurred to him. Yet he could not help feeling the want of that excitement which, singularly enough, was most conducive to that calm equanimity for which he was notorious. He looked at the gloomy walls that rose 1,000 feet sheer above the circling pines around him, at the sky ominously clouded, at the valley below already deepening into shadow, and doing so, suddenly he heard his own name called. A horseman slowly ascended the trail. In the fresh, open face of the newcomer, Mr. Oakhurst recognized Tom Simpson, otherwise known as the Innocent of Sandy Bar. He had met him some months before over a little game, and had with perfect equanimity won the entire fortune, amounting to some $40, of that guileless youth. After the game was finished, Mr. Oakhurst drew the youthful speculator behind the door and thus addressed him. "Tommy, you're a good little man, but you can't gamble worth a cent. Don't try it ever again." He then handed him his money back, pushed him gently from the room, and so made a devoted slave of Tom Simpson. There was a remembrance of this in his boyish and enthusiastic greeting of Mr. Oakhurst. He had started, he said, to go to Poker Flat to seek his fortune. Alone? No, not exactly alone, in fact, a giggle. He had run away with Piney Woods. Didn't Mr. Oakhurst remember Piney? She that used to wait on the table at the Temperance House? They had been engaged a long time, but old Jake Woods had objected, and so they had run away, and were going to Poker Flat to be married, and here they were. And they were tired out, and how lucky it was they had found a place to camp, and company. All this the Innocent delivered rapidly, while Piney, a stout, comely damsel of 15, emerged from behind the pine tree where she had been blushing unseen, and rode to the side of her lover. Mr. Oakhurst seldom troubled himself with sentiment, still less with propriety, but he had a vague idea that the situation was not fortunate. He retained, however, his presence of mind sufficiently to kick Uncle Billy, who was about to say something, and Uncle Billy was sober enough to recognize in Mr. Oakhurst's kick a superior power that would not bear trifling. He then endeavored to dissuade Tom Simpson from delaying further, but in vain. He even pointed out the fact that there was no provision nor means of making a camp. But, unluckily, the innocent met this objection by assuring the party that he was provided with an extra mule loaded with provisions, and by the discovery of a rude attempt at a log house near the trail. "Piney can stay with Mrs. Oakhurst," said the innocent, pointing to the Duchess, "and I can shift for myself." Nothing but Mr. Oakhurst's admonishing foot saved Uncle Billy from bursting into a roar of laughter. As it was, he felt compelled to retire up the canyon until he could recover his gravity. There he confided the joke to the tall pine trees, with many slaps of his leg, contortions of his face, and the usual profanity. But when he returned to the party, he found them seated by a fire, for the air had grown strangely chill and the sky overcast, in apparently amicable conversation. Piney was actually talking in an impulsive, girlish fashion to the Duchess, who was listening with an interest and animation she had not shown for many days. The innocent was holding forth, apparently with equal effort, to Mr. Oakhurst and Mother Shipton, who was actually relaxing into amiability. "Is this yere a damn picnic?" said Uncle Billy, with inward scorn, as he surveyed the sylvan group, the glancing firelight, and the tethered animals in the foreground. Suddenly an idea mingled with the alcoholic fumes that disturbed his brain. It was apparently of a jocular nature, for he felt impelled to slap his leg again and cram his fist into his mouth. As the shadows crept slowly up the mountain, a slight breeze rocked the tops of the pine trees and moaned through their long and gloomy aisles. The ruined cabin, patched and covered with pine boughs, was set apart for the ladies. As the lovers parted, they unaffectedly exchanged a kiss, so honest and sincere that it might have been heard above the swaying pines. The frail Duchess and the malevolent Mother Shipton were probably too stunned to remark upon this last evidence of simplicity, and so turned without a word to the hut. The fire was replenished, the men lay down before the door, and in a few minutes were asleep. Mr. Oakhurst was a light sleeper. Toward morning he awoke benumbed and cold. As he stirred the dying fire, the wind, which was now blowing strongly, brought to his cheek that which caused the blood to leave it. Snow. He started to his feet with the intention of awakening the sleepers, for there was no time to lose. But turning to where Uncle Billy had been lying, he found him gone. A suspicion leaped to his brain and a curse to his lips. He ran to the spot where the mules had been tethered. They were no longer there. The tracks were already rapidly disappearing in the snow. The momentary excitement brought Mr. Oakhurst back to the fire with his usual calm. He did not waken the sleepers. The innocent slumbered peacefully, with a smile on his good-humored, freckled face. The virgin Piney slept beside her frailer sisters as sweetly as though attended by celestial guardians. And Mr. Oakhurst, drawing his blanket over his shoulders, stroked his mustache and waited for the dawn. It came slowly in a whirling mist of snowflakes that dazzled and confused the eye. What could be seen of the landscape appeared magically changed. He looked over the valley and summed up the present and future in 2 words: snowed in. A careful inventory of the provisions, which, fortunately for the party, had been stored within the hut and so escaped the felonious fingers of Uncle Billy, disclosed the fact that with care and prudence they might last 10 days longer. "That is," said Mr. Oakhurst, sotto voce, to the innocent, "if you're willin' to board us. If you ain't, and perhaps you better not, you can wait till Uncle Billy gets back with provisions." For some occult reason, Mr. Oakhurst could not bring himself to disclose Uncle Billy's rascality, and so offered the hypothesis that he had wandered from the camp and had accidentally stampeded the animals. He dropped a warning to the Duchess and Mother Shipton, who of course knew the facts of their associate's defection. "They'll find out the truth about us all when they find out anything," he added significantly, "and there's no good frightening them now." Tom Simpson not only put all his worldly store at the disposal of Mr. Oakhurst, but seemed to enjoy the prospect of their enforced seclusion. "We'll have a good camp for a week, and then the snow will melt, and we'll all go back together." The cheerful gaiety of the young man and Mr. Oakhurst's calm infected the others. The Innocent, with the aid of pine boughs, extemporized the thatch for the roofless cabin, and the Duchess directed Piney in the rearrangement of the interior with a taste and tact that opened the blue eyes of that provincial maiden to their fullest extent. "I reckon now you're used to fine things at Poker Flat," said Piney. The Duchess turned away sharply to conceal something that reddened her cheeks through its professional tint, and Mother Shipton requested Piney not to chatter. But when Mr. Oakhurst returned from a weary search for the trail, he heard the sound of happy laughter echoed from the rocks. He stopped in some alarm, and his thoughts first naturally reverted to the whiskey, which he had prudently cached. "And yet it didn't somehow sound like whiskey," said the gambler. It was not until he caught sight of the blazing fire through the still blinding storm and the group around it that he settled into the conviction that it was square fun. Whether Mr. Oakhurst had cached his cards with the whiskey as something to bar the free access of the community, I cannot say. It was certain that, in Mother Shipton's words, he "didn't say cards once" during that evening. Happily the time was beguiled by an accordion, produced somewhat ostentatiously by Tom Simpson from his pack. Notwithstanding some difficulties attending the manipulation of this instrument, Piney Woods managed to pluck several reluctant melodies from its keys, to an accompaniment by the Innocent on a pair of bone castanets. But the crowning festivity of the evening was reached in a crude camp-meeting hymn, which the lovers, joining hands, sang with great earnestness and vociferation. I fear that a certain defiant tone and Covenanter's swing to its chorus, rather than any devotional quality, caused it speedily to infect the others, who at last joined in the refrain, "I'm proud to live in the service of the Lord, and I'm bound to die in his army." The pines rocked, the storm eddied and whirled above the miserable group, and the flames of their altar leaped heavenward as if in token of the vow. At midnight the storm abated, the rolling clouds parted, and the stars glittered keenly above the sleeping camp. Mr. Oakhurst, whose professional habits had enabled him to live in the smallest possible amount of sleep, in dividing the watch with Tom Simpson, somehow managed to take upon himself the greater part of that duty. He excused himself to the Innocent by saying that he had often been a week without sleep. "Doing what?" asked Tom. "Poker," replied Oakhurst sententiously. "When a man gets a streak of luck, he don't get tired. The luck gives in first." "Luck," continued the gambler, reflectively, "is a mighty queer thing. All you know about it for certain is that it's bound to change, and it's finding out when it's going to change that makes you. We've had a streak of bad luck since we left Poker Flat. You come along, and slap you get into it, too. If you can hold your cards right along, you're all right. For," added the gambler, with cheerful irreverence, "I'm proud to live in the service of the Lord, and I'm bound to die in his army." The third day came, and the sun, looking through the white-curtained valley, saw the outcasts divide their slowly decreasing store of provisions for the morning meal. It was one of the peculiarities of that mountain climate that its rays diffused a kindly warmth over the wintry landscape, as if in regretful commiseration of the past. But it revealed drift on drift of snow piled high around the hut, a hopeless, uncharted, trackless sea of white lying below the rocky shores to which the castaways still clung. Through the marvelously clear air the smoke of the pastoral village of Poker Flat rose miles away. Mother Shipton saw it, and from a remote pinnacle of her rocky fastness hurled in that direction a final malediction. It was her last vituperative attempt, and perhaps for that reason was invested with a certain degree of sublimity. It did her good, she privately informed the Duchess. "Just you go out there and cuss and see." She then set herself to the task of amusing "the child," as she and the Duchess were pleased to call Piney. Piney was no chicken, but it was a soothing and original theory of the pair thus to account for the fact that she didn't swear and wasn't improper. When night crept up again through the gorges, the reedy notes of the accordion rose and fell in fitful spasms and long-drawn gasps by the flickering campfire. But music failed to fill entirely the aching void left by insufficient food, and a new diversion was proposed by Piney, storytelling. Neither Mr. Oakhurst nor his female companions caring to relate their personal experiences, this plan would have failed too but for the innocent. Some months before he had chanced upon a stray copy of Mr. Pope's ingenious translation of the Iliad. He now proposed to narrate the principal incidents of that poem, having thoroughly mastered the argument and fairly forgotten the words, in the current vernacular of Sandy Bar. And so, for the rest of that night, the Homeric demigods again walked the earth. Trojan bully and wily Greek wrestled in the winds, and the great pines in the canyon seemed to bow to the wrath of the son of Peleus. Mr. Oakhurst listened with quiet satisfaction. Most especially he was interested in the fate of Ash-Heels, as the innocent persisted in denominating the swift-footed Achilles. So with small food and much of Homer and the accordion, a week passed over the heads of the outcasts. The sun again forsook them, and again from leaden skies the snowflakes were sifted over the land. Day by day closer around them drew the snowy circle, until at last they looked from their prison over drifted walls of dazzling white that towered 20 feet above their heads. It became more and more difficult to replenish their fires, even from the fallen trees beside them, now half hidden in the drifts. And yet no one complained. The lovers turned from the dreary prospect and looked into each other's eyes, and were happy. Mr. Oakhurst settled himself coolly to the losing game before him. The Duchess, more cheerful than she had been, assumed the care of Piney. Only Mother Shipton, once the strongest of the party, seemed to sicken and fade. At midnight on the 10th day she called Oakhurst to her side. "I'm goin'," she said, in a voice of querulous weakness. "But don't say anything about it. Don't waken the kids. Take the bundle from under my head and open it." Mr. Oakhurst did so. It contained Mother Shipton's rations for the week, untouched. "Give him to the child," she said, pointing to the sleepy Piney. "You've starved yourself," said the gambler. "That's what they call it," said the woman, querulously, as she lay down again, and turning her face to the wall, passed quietly away. The accordion and the bones were put aside that day, and Homer was forgotten. When the body of Mother Shipton had been committed to the snow, Mr. Oakhurst took the innocent aside and showed him a pair of snowshoes which he had fashioned from the old pack saddle. "There's one chance in 100 to save her yet," he said, pointing to Piney. "But it's there," he added, pointing toward Poker Flat. "If you can reach there in 2 days, she's safe." "And you?" asked Tom Simpson. "I'll stay here," was the curt reply. The lovers parted with a long embrace. "You're not going too?" said the Duchess as she saw Mr. Oakhurst apparently waiting to accompany him. "As far as the canyon," he replied. He turned suddenly and kissed the Duchess, leaving her pallid face aflame and her trembling limbs rigid with amazement. Night came, but not Mr. Oakhurst. It brought the storm again and the whirling snow. Then the Duchess, feeding the fire, found that someone had quietly piled beside the hut enough fuel to last a few days longer. The tears rose to her eyes, but she hid them from Piney. The women slept but little. In the morning, looking into each other's faces, they read their fate. Neither spoke, but Piney, accepting the position of the stronger, drew near and placed her arm around the Duchess's waist. They kept this attitude for the rest of the day. That night the storm reached its greatest fury, and rending asunder the protecting pines, invaded the very hut. Toward morning they found themselves unable to feed the fire, which gradually died away. As the ember slowly blackened, the Duchess crept closer to Piney, and broke the silence of many hours. "Piney," Can you pray?" "No, dear," said Piney simply. The Duchess, without knowing exactly why, felt relieved, and putting her head upon Piney's shoulder, spoke no more. And so reclining, the younger and purer pillowing the head of her soiled sister upon her virgin breast, they fell asleep. The wind lulled as if it feared to waken them. Feathery drifts of snow, shaken from the long pine boughs, flew like white-winged birds, and settled about them as they slept. The moon through the rifted clouds looked down upon what had been the camp, but all human stain, all trace of earthly travail, was hidden beneath the spotless mantle mercifully flung from above. They slept all that day and the next, nor did they waken when voices and footsteps broke the silence of the camp, and when pitying fingers brushed the snow from their wan faces, you could scarcely have told from the equal peace that dwelt upon them which was she that had sinned. Even the law of Poker Flat recognized this, and turned away, leaving them still locked in each other's arms. But at the head of the gulch, on one of the largest pine trees, they found the deuce of clubs pinned to the bark with a bowie knife. It bore the following, written in pencil, in a firm hand: "Beneath this tree lies the body of John Oakhurst, who struck a streak of bad luck on the 23rd of November, 1850, and handed in his checks on the 7th December, 1850. And pulseless and cold, with a derringer by his side and a bullet in his heart, though still calm as in life, beneath the snow lay he who was at once the strongest and yet the weakest of the outcasts of Poker Flat." End of The Outcasts of Poker Flat by Bret Harte.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. From Characters of Shakespeare's Plays by William Hazlitt. Romeo and Juliet. Read by David Barnes, London, August 2006. Romeo and Juliet is the only tragedy which Shakespeare has written entirely on a love story. It is supposed to have been his first play, and it deserves to stand in that proud rank. There is the buoyant spirit of youth in every line, in the rapturous intoxication of hope, and in the bitterness of despair. It has been said of Romeo and Juliet by a great critic that, quote, "whatever is most intoxicating in the odour of a southern spring, languishing in the song of the nightingale, or voluptuous in the first opening of the rose, is to be found in this poem." Unquote. The description is true, and yet it does not answer to our idea of the play. For if it has the sweetness of the rose, it has its freshness too. If it has the languor of the nightingale's song, it has also its giddy transport. If it has the softness of a southern spring, it is as glowing and as bright. There is nothing of a sickly and sentimental cast. Romeo and Juliet are in love, but they are not lovesick. Everything speaks the very soul of pleasure, the high and healthy pulse of the passions. The heart beats, the blood circulates and mantles throughout. Their courtship is not an insipid interchange of sentiments lip-deep, learnt at second hand from poems and plays, made up of beauties of the most shadowy kind, of fancies wan that hang the pensive head, of evanescent smiles and sighs that breathe not, of delicacy that shrinks from the touch, and feebleness that scarce supports itself, an elaborate vacuity of thought, and an artificial dearth of sense, spirit, truth, and nature. It is the reverse of all this. It is Shakespeare all over, and Shakespeare when he was young. We have heard it objected to Romeo and Juliet that it is founded on an idle passion between a boy and a girl, who have scarcely seen, and can have but little sympathy or rational esteem for one another, who have had no experience of the good or ills of life, and whose raptures or despair must be therefore equally groundless and fantastical. Whoever objects to the youth of the parties in this play as too unripe and crude to pluck the sweets of love, and wishes to see a first love carried on into a good old age, and the passions taken at the rebound, when their force is spent, may find all this done in The Stranger and in other German plays, where they do things by contraries, and transpose nature to inspire sentiment and create philosophy. Shakespeare proceeded in a more straightforward, and, we think, effectual way. He did not endeavour to extract beauty from wrinkles, or the wild throb of passion from the last expiring sigh of indifference. He did not gather grapes of thorns nor figs of thistles. It was not his way. But he has given a picture of human life, such as it is in the order of nature. He has founded the passion of the two lovers not on the pleasures they had experienced, but on all the pleasures they had not experienced. All that was to come of life was theirs. At that untried source of promised happiness they slaked their thirst, and the first eager draught made them drunk with love and joy. They were in full possession of their senses and their affections. Their hopes were of air, their desires of fire. Youth is the season of love, because the heart is then first melted in tenderness from the touch of novelty, and kindled to rapture, for it knows no end of its enjoyments or its wishes. Desire has no limit but itself. Passion, the love and expectation of pleasure, is infinite, extravagant, inexhaustible, till experience comes to check and kill it. Juliet exclaims on her first interview with Romeo, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep." And why should it not? What was to hinder the thrilling tide of pleasure, which had just gushed from her heart, from flowing on without stint or measure, but experience which she was yet without? What was to abate the transport of the first sweet sense of pleasure, which her heart and her senses had just tasted, but indifference, which she was yet a stranger to? What was there to check the ardour of hope, of faith, of constancy, just rising in her breast, but disappointment which she had not yet felt? As are the desires and the hopes of youthful passion, such is the keenness of its disappointments and their baleful effect. Such is the transition in this play from the highest bliss to the lowest despair, from the nuptial couch to an untimely grave. The only evil that even in apprehension befalls the two lovers is the loss of the greatest possible felicity. Yet this loss is fatal to both, for they had rather part with life than bear the thought of surviving all that had made life dear to them. In all this, Shakespeare has but followed nature, which existed in his time as well as now. The modern philosophy, which reduces the whole theory of the mind to habitual impressions, and leaves the natural impulses of passion and imagination out of the account, had not then been discovered, or if it had, would have been little calculated for the uses of poetry. It is the inadequacy of the same false system of philosophy to account for the strength of our earliest attachments which has led Mr. Wordsworth to indulge in the mystical visions of Platonism in his Ode on the Progress of Life. He has very admirably described the vividness of our impressions in youth and childhood, and how, quote, they fade by degrees into the light of common day, unquote. And he ascribes the change to the supposition of a pre-existent state, as if our early thoughts were nearer heaven, reflections of former trails of glory, shadows of our past being. This is idle. It is not from the knowledge of the past that the first impressions of things derive their gloss and splendour, but from our ignorance of the future, which fills the void to come with the warmth of our desires, with our gayest hopes and brightest fancies. It is the obscurity spread before it that colours the prospect of life with hope, as it is the cloud which reflects the rainbow. There is no occasion to resort to any mystical union and transmission of feeling through different states of being to account for the romantic enthusiasm of youth, nor to plant the root of hope in the grave, nor to derive it from the skies. Its root is in the heart of man. It lifts its head above the stars. Desire and imagination are inmates of the human breast. The heaven, quote, that lies about us in our infancy, unquote, is only a new world, of which we know nothing but what we wish it to be, and believe all that we wish. In youth and boyhood, the world we live in is the world of desire and of fancy. It is experience that brings us down to the world of reality. What is it that in youth sheds a dewy light round the evening star, that makes the daisy look so bright, that perfumes the hyacinth, that embalms the first kiss of love? It is the delight of novelty, and the seeing no end to the pleasure that we fondly believe is still in store for us. The heart revels in the luxury of its own thoughts, and is unable to sustain the weight of hope and love that presses upon it. The effects of the passion of love alone might have dissipated Mr. Wordsworth's theory, if he means anything more by it than an ingenious and poetical allegory. That, at least, is not a link in the chain let down from other worlds. Quote, the purple light of love, unquote, is not a dim reflection of the smiles of celestial bliss. It does not appear till the middle of life, and then seems like, quote, another morn risen on midday, unquote. In this respect, the soul comes into the world, quote, in utter nakedness, unquote. Love waits for the ripening of the youthful blood. The sense of pleasure precedes the love of pleasure, but with the sense of pleasure, as soon as it is felt, come thronging infinite desires and hopes of pleasure, and love is mature as soon as born. It withers and it dies almost as soon. This play presents a beautiful coup d'œil of the progress of human life. In thought it occupies years, and embraces the circle of the affections from childhood to old age. Juliet has become a great girl, a young woman, since we first remember her a little thing in the idle prattle of the nurse. Lady Capulet was about her age when she became a mother, and old Capulet somewhat impatiently tells his younger visitors, "I've seen the day that I have worn a visor, and could tell a whispering tale in a fair lady's ear, such as would please. 'Tis gone, 'tis gone, 'tis gone." Thus one period of life makes way for the following, and one generation pushes another off the stage. One of the most striking passages to show the intense feeling of youth in this play is Capulet's invitation to Paris to visit his entertainment. At my poor house, look to behold this night earth-treading stars that make dark heaven light. Such comfort as do lusty young men feel when well-apparelled April on the heel of limping winter treads, even such delight among fresh female buds shall you this night inherit at my house. The feelings of youth and of the spring are here blended together like the breath of opening flowers. Images of vernal beauty appear to have floated before the author's mind in writing this poem, in profusion. Here is another of exquisite beauty, brought in more by accident than by necessity. Montague declares of his son, smit with a hopeless passion, which he will not reveal, but he, his own affection's counsellor, is to himself so secret and so close, so far from sounding and discovery, as is the bud bit with an envious worm, ere he can spread his sweet leaves to the air, or dedicate his beauty to the sun. This casual description is as full of passionate beauty as when Romeo dwells in frantic fondness on the white wonder of his Juliet's hand. The reader may, if he pleases, contrast the exquisite pastoral simplicity of the above lines with the gorgeous description of Juliet when Romeo first sees her at her father's house, surrounded by company and artificial splendour. What lady's that which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight? Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. Her beauty hangs upon the cheek of night, like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear. It would be hard to say which of the two garden scenes is the finest, that where he first converses with his love, or takes leave of her the morning after their marriage. Both are like a heaven upon earth, the blissful bowers of paradise let down upon this lower world. We will give only one passage of these well-known scenes to show the perfect refinement and delicacy of Shakespeare's conception of the female character. It is wonderful how Collins, who was a critic and a poet of great sensibility, should have encouraged the common error on this subject by saying, quote, "But stronger Shakespeare felt for man alone." Unquote. The passage we mean is Juliet's apology for her maiden boldness. Thou know'st the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepaint my cheek for that which thou hast heard me speak to-night. Fain would I dwell on form, fain deny what I have spoke, but farewell compliment. Dost thou love me? I know thou wilt say aye, and I will take thee at thy word. Yet if thou swear'st, thou mayst prove false. At lovers' perjuries, they say, Jove laughs. O gentle Romeo, if thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully. Or if thou think I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse, and say thee nay, so thou wilt woo, but else not for the world. In truth, fair Montague, I am too fond, and therefore thou mayst think my haviour light, and trust me, gentlemen, I'll prove more true than those that have more cunning to be strange. I should have been more strange, I must confess, but that thou overheard'st, ere I was ware, my true love's passion. Therefore pardon me, and not impute this yielding to light love, which the dark night hath so discovered. In this and all the rest her heart, fluttering between pleasure, hope, and fear, seems to have dictated to her tongue, and calls true love spoken simple modesty. Of the same sort, but bolder in virgin innocence, is her soliloquy after her marriage with Romeo. Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds, towards Phoebus' mansion. Such a waggoner as Phaeton would whip you to the west, and bring in cloudy night immediately. Spread thy close curtain, love-performing night, that runaways' eyes may wink, and Romeo leap to these arms, untalked of and unseen. Lovers can see to do their amorous right by their own beauties, or if love be blind, it best agrees with night. Come, civil knight, thou sober-suited matron, all in black, and learn me how to lose a winning match, played for a pair of stainless maidenhoods. Hood my unmanned blood bating in my cheeks with thy black mantle, till strange love grown bold thinks true love acted simple modesty. Come, night, come, Romeo, come, thou day in night, for thou wilt lie upon the wings of night, whiter than new snow on a raven's back. Come, gentle night, come, loving, black-browed night, give me my Romeo, and when he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world shall be in love with night, and pay no worship to the garish sun. Oh, I have bought the mansion of a love, but not possessed it, and though I am sold, not yet enjoyed. So tedious is this day, as is the night before some festival to an impatient child that hath new robes and may not wear them. We'd rather insert this passage here, inasmuch as we have no doubt it has been expunged from the family Shakespeare. Such critics do not perceive that the feelings of the heart sanctify, without disguising, the impulses of nature. Without refinement themselves, they confound modesty with hypocrisy. Not so the German critic Schlegel. Speaking of Romeo and Juliet, he says, quote, "It was reserved for Shakespeare to unite purity of heart and the glow of imagination, sweetness and dignity of manners, and passionate violence in one ideal picture." Unquote. The character is indeed one of perfect truth and sweetness. It has nothing forward, nothing coy, nothing affected or coquettish about it. It is a pure effusion of nature. It is as frank as it is modest, for it has no thought that it wishes to conceal. It reposes in conscious innocence on the strength of its affections. Its delicacy does not consist in coldness and reserve, but in combining warmth of imagination and tenderness of heart with the most voluptuous sensibility. Love is a gentle flame that rarefies and expands her whole being. What an idea of trembling haste and airy grace, borne upon the thoughts of love, does the friar's exclamation give her, as she approaches his cell to be married. Here comes the lady, oh so light of foot, will ne'er wear out the everlasting flint. A lover may bestride the gossamer that idles in the wanton summer air, and yet not fall, so light is vanity. The tragic part of this character is of a piece with the rest. It is the heroic founded on tenderness and delicacy. Of this kind are her resolution to follow the friar's advice, and the conflict in her bosom between apprehension and love when she comes to take the sleeping poison. Shakespeare is blamed for the mixture of low characters. If this is a deformity, it is the source of 1,000 beauties. One instance is the contrast between the guileless simplicity of Juliet's attachment to her first love and the convenient policy of the nurse in advising her to marry Paris, which excites such indignation in her mistress. "Ancient damnation, O most wicked fiend," etc. Romeo is Hamlet in love. There is the same rich exuberance of passion and sentiment in the one that there is of thought and sentiment in the other. Both are absent and self-involved, both live out of themselves in a world of imagination. Hamlet is abstracted from everything. Romeo is abstracted from everything but his love, and lost in it. His frail thoughts dally with faint surmise, and are fashioned out of the suggestions of hope, the flatteries of sleep. He is himself only in his Juliet. She is his only reality, his heart's true home and idol. The rest of the world is to him a passing dream. How finely is this character portrayed, where he recollects himself on seeing Paris slain at the tomb of Juliet. What said my man when my betossed soul did not attend him as we rode? I think he told me Paris should have married Juliet. And again, just before he hears the sudden tidings of her death, if I may trust the flattery of sleep, my dreams presage some joyful news at hand. My bosom's lord sits lightly on his throne, and all this day an unaccustomed spirit lifts me above the ground with cheerful thoughts. I dreamt my lady came and found me dead. Strange dream, that gives a dead man leave to think, and breathed such life with kisses on my lips that I revived and was an emperor. Ah me, how sweet is love itself possessed, when but love's shadows are so rich in joy. Romeo's passion for Juliet is not a first love. It succeeds and drives out his passion for another mistress, Rosaline, as the sun hides the stars. This is perhaps an artifice, not absolutely necessary, to give us a higher opinion of the lady, while the first absolute surrender of her heart to him enhances the richness of the prize. The commencement, progress, and ending of his second passion are, however, complete in themselves, not injured, if they are not bettered by the first. The outline of the play is taken from an Italian novel, but the dramatic arrangement of the different scenes between the lovers, the more than dramatic interest in the progress of the story, the development of the characters with time and circumstances, just according to the degree and kind of interest excited, are not inferior to the expression of passion and nature. It has been ingeniously remarked, among other proofs of skill in the contrivance of the fable, that the improbability of the main incident in the piece, the administering of the sleeping potion, is softened and obviated from the beginning by the introduction of the friar on his first appearance, culling simples and descanting on their virtues. Of the passionate scenes in this tragedy, that between the friar and Romeo when he is told of his sentence of banishment, that between Juliet and the nurse when she hears of it, and of the death of her cousin Tybalt, which bear no proportion in her mind when passion, after the first shock of surprise, throws its weight into the scale of her affections, and the last scene at the tomb, are among the most natural and overpowering. In all of these it is not merely the force of any one passion that is given, but the slightest and most unlooked-for transitions from one to another, the mingling currents of every different feeling rising up and prevailing in turn, swayed by the master mind of the poet, as the waves undulate beneath the gliding storm. Thus, when Juliet has by her complaints encouraged the nurse to say, "Shame come to Romeo," she instantly repels the wish, which she had herself occasioned, by answering, "Blistered be thy tongue for such a wish. He was not born to shame. Upon his brow shame is ashamed to sit, for 'tis a throne where honour may be crowned sole monarch of the universal earth. Oh, what a beast was I to chide him so!" Nurse: "Will you speak well of him that killed your cousin?" Juliet: "Shall I speak ill of him that is my husband? Ah, my poor lord, what tongue shall smooth thy name, when I, thy 3 hours' wife, have mangled it?" and then follows on the neck of her remorse and returning fondness, that wish treading almost on the brink of impiety, but still held back by the strength of her devotion to her Lord, that father, mother, nay, or both were dead, rather than Romeo banished. If she requires any other excuse, it is in the manner in which Romeo echoes her frantic grief and disappointment in the next scene at being banished from her. Perhaps one of the finest pieces of acting that ever was witnessed on the stage is Mr. Kean's manner of doing this scene, and his repetition of the word banished. He treads close indeed upon the genius of his author. A passage which this celebrated actor and able commentator on Shakespeare — actors are the best commentators on the poets — did not give with equal truth or force of feeling, was the one which Romeo makes at the tomb of Juliet before he drinks the poison. Let me peruse this face, Mercutio's kinsman, noble county Paris. What said my man when my betossed soul did not attend him as we rode? I think he told me Paris should have married Juliet. Said he not so? Or did I dream it so? Or am I mad, hearing him talk of Juliet, to think it was so? Oh, give me thy hand, one writ with me in sour misfortune's book. I'll bury thee in a triumphant grave, for here lies Juliet. O my love, my wife, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there. Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favour can I do to thee, than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain to sunder this that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin. Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? I will believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour. For fear of that I will stay still with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here, here will I remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace. And lips, O you the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavoury guide, thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks my sea-sick weary bark. Here's to my love. O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick, thus with a kiss I die. The lines in this speech describing the loveliness of Juliet, who is supposed to be dead, have been compared to those in which it is said of Cleopatra after her death that she looked, quote, as she would take another Antony in her strong toil of grace, unquote. And a question has been started which is the finest, that we do not pretend to decide. We can more easily decide between Shakespeare and any other author than between him and himself. Shall we quote any more passages to show his genius, or the beauty of Romeo and Juliet? At that rate we might quote the whole. The late Mr. Sheridan, on being shown a volume of the beauties of Shakespeare, very properly asked, "But where are the other 11? The character of Mercutio in this play is one of the most mercurial and spirited of the productions of Shakespeare's comic muse." End of Romeo and Juliet.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sorrow by Anton Chekhov. The turner, Grigory Petrov, who had been known for years past as a splendid craftsman and at the same time as the most senseless peasant in the Golchinskoy district, was taking his old woman to the hospital. He had to drive over 20 miles, and it was an awful road. A government post driver could hardly have coped with it, much less an incompetent sluggard like Grigory. A cutting cold wind was blowing straight in his face. Clouds of snowflakes were whirling around and around in all directions, so that one could not tell whether the snow was falling from the sky or rising from the earth. The fields, the telegraph posts, and the forests could not be seen for the fog of snow. And when a particularly violent gust of wind swooped down on Grigory, even the yoke above the horse's head could not be seen. The wretched, feeble little nag crawled slowly along. It took all its strength to drag its leg out of the snow and to tug with its head. The turner was in a hurry. He kept restlessly hopping up and down on the front seat and lashing the horse's back. "Don't cry, Matryona," he muttered. "Have a little patience. Please God, we shall reach the hospital, and in a trice it will be the right thing for you. Pavel Ivanitch will give you some little drops, or tell him to bleed you, or maybe his honor will be pleased to rub you with some sort of spirit. It'll draw it out of your side. Pavel Ivanitch will do his best. He will shout and stamp about, but he will do his best. He is a nice gentleman, affable. God give him health. As soon as we get there, he will dart out of his room and will begin calling me names. 'How? Why so?' he will cry. 'Why did you not come at the right time? I am not a dog to be hanging about waiting on your devils all day. Why did you not come in the morning? Go away, get out of my sight. Come again tomorrow.' And I shall say, 'Mr. Dr. Pavel Ivanitch, your honor. Get on, do, plague take you, you devil, get on.'" The turner lashed his nag, and without looking at the old woman, went on muttering to himself. "Your honor, it's true as before God. Here's the cross for you. I set off almost before it was light. How could I be here in time if the Lord, the Mother of God, is wroth and has sent such a snowstorm? Kindly look for yourself. Even a first-rate horse cannot do it, while mine, you can see for yourself, is not a horse but a disgrace." And Pavel Ivanitch will frown and shout, "We know you. You always find some excuse. Especially you, Grishka. I know you of old. I'll be bound you have stopped at half a dozen taverns. And I shall say, 'Your honor, am I a criminal or a heathen? My old woman has given up her soul to God. She is dying. And am I going to run from tavern to tavern? What an idea, upon my word. Plague take them, the taverns. Then Pavel Ivanitch will order you to be taken into the hospital, and I shall fall at his feet. Pavel Ivanitch, your honor, we thank you most humbly. Forgive us fools and anathemas. Don't be hard on us peasants. We deserve a good kicking, while you graciously put yourself up and mess your feet in the snow.' And Pavel Ivanitch will give me a look, as though he would like to hit me, and will say, 'You'd much better not be swilling vodka, you fool. But taking pity on your old woman instead of falling at my feet, you want a thrashing. You are right there, a thrashing, Pavel Ivanitch. Strike me, God. But how can we help bowing down at your feet if you are our benefactor and a real father to us? Your honor, I give you my word, here as before God. You may spit in my face if I deceive you. As soon as my Matryona, the same here. is well again and restored to her natural condition, I'll make anything for your honor, and that you would like to order. A cigarette case, if you like, or the best birch wood, balls for croquet, skittles of the most foreign pattern I can turn. I will make anything for you. I won't take a farthing from you. In Moscow they would charge you 4 rubles for such a cigarette case, but I won't take a farthing. The doctor will laugh and say, "Oh, all right, I see, but it's a pity you are a drunkard." I know how to manage the gentry, old girl. There isn't a gentleman I couldn't talk to. Only God grant we don't get off the road. Oh, how it is blowing. One's eyes are full of snow. And the turner went on muttering endlessly. He prattled on mechanically to get a little relief from his depressing feelings. He had plenty of words on his tongue, but the thoughts in question in his brain were even more numerous. Sorrow had come upon the turner, unawares, unlooked for, and unexpected, and now he could not get over it, could not recover himself. He had lived hitherto in unruffled calm, as though in drunken half-consciousness, knowing neither grief nor joy, and now he was suddenly aware of a dreadful pain in his heart. The careless idler and drunkard found himself quite suddenly in the position of a busy man, weighed down by anxieties and haste, and even struggling with nature. The turner remembered that his trouble had begun the evening before, when he had come home yesterday evening, a little drunk as usual, and from long-established habit had begun swearing and shaking his fists. His old woman had looked at her la response as she had never looked at him before. Usually the expression in her aged eyes were that of a martyr, meek like that of a dog, frequently beaten and badly fed. This time she had looked at him sternly and immovably, as saints in the holy pictures or dying people look. From that strange, evil look in her eyes, the trouble had begun. The turner, stupefied with amazement, borrowed a horse from a neighbor, and now was taking his old woman to the hospital in the hope that, by means of powders and ointments, Pavel Ivanitch would bring back his old woman's habitual expression. "I say, Matryona," the turner muttered, "if Pavel Ivanitch asks you whether I beat you, say, 'Never,' and I never will beat you again. I swear it. And did I ever beat you out of spite? I just beat you without thinking. I'm sorry for you. Some men wouldn't trouble, but here I am taking you. I am doing my best. And the way it snows, thy will be done, O Lord. God grant we don't get off the road. Does your side ache, Matryona, that you don't speak? I ask you, does your side ache?" It struck him as strange that the snow on his old woman's face was not melting. It was queer that the face itself looked somehow drawn, and had turned a pale grey. Dingy waxen hue had grown grave and solemn. "You are a fool," muttered the turner. "I tell you on my conscience, before God, and you go and, well, you are a fool. I have a good mind not to take you to Pavel Ivanitch." The turner let the reins go and began thinking. He could not bring himself to look around at his old woman. He was frightened. He was afraid, too, of asking her a question and not getting an answer. At last, to make an end of uncertainty, without looking around, he felt his old woman's cold hand. That lifted hand felt like a log. "She is dead, then. What a business!" And the turner cried. He was not so much sorry as annoyed. He thought how quickly everything passes in this world. His trouble had hardly begun when the final catastrophe had happened. He had not had time to live with his old woman, to show her he was sorry for her before she died. He had lived with her for 40 years, but those 40 years had passed by as it were in a fog. What with drunkenness, quarreling, and poverty, there had been no feeling of life. And as though to spite him, his old woman died at the very time when he felt he was sorry for her, that he could not live without her, and that he had behaved dreadfully badly to her. Why, she used to go the round of the village, he remembered. I sent her out myself to beg for bread. What a business! She ought to have lived another 10 years, the silly thing. As it is, I'll be bound she thinks I really was that sort of man. Holy Mother! But where the devil am I driving? There's no need for a doctor now, but a burial. Turn back! Gregory turned back and lashed the horse with all his might. The road grew worse and worse every hour. Now he could not see the yoke at all. Now and then the sledge ran into a young fir tree. A dark object scratched the turner's hands and flashed before his eyes, and the field of vision was white and whirling again. To live over again, thought the turner. He remembered that 40 years ago Matryona had been young, handsome, merry, and that she had come of a well-to-do family. They had married her to him because they had been attracted by his handicraft. All the essentials for a happy life had been there. But the trouble was that, just as he got drunk after the wedding and lay sprawling on the stove, so he had got on without waking up till now. His wedding he remembered, but what happened after the wedding? For the life of him, he could remember nothing, except perhaps that he had drunk, lain on the stove, and quarreled. 40 years had been wasted like that. The white clouds of snow were beginning little by little to turn gray. It was getting dusk. Where am I going? The turner suddenly bethought him with a start. I ought to be thinking of the burial, and I am on the way to the hospital. It is as though I had gone crazy. Gregory turned around again, and again lashed his horse. The little nag strained its utmost, and with a snort fell into a little trot. The turner lashed it on, the back, time after time. A knocking was audible behind him, and though he did not look around, he knew it was the dead woman's head knocking against the sledge. And the snow kept turning darker and darker. The wind grew colder and more cutting. To live over again, thought the turner. I should get a new lathe, take orders, give the money to my old woman. And then he dropped the reins. He looked for them, tried to pick them up, but could not. His hands would not work. It does not matter, he thought. The horse will go of itself. It knows the way. I might have a little sleep now, before the funeral or the requiem. It would be as well to get a little rest. The turner closed his eyes and dozed. A little later he heard the horse stop. He opened his eyes and saw before him something dark, like a hut or a haystack. He would have got out of the sledge and found out what it was, but he felt overcome by such inertia that it seemed better to freeze than move, and he sank into a peaceful sleep. He woke up in a big room with painted walls. Bright sunlight was streaming in at the windows. The turner saw people facing him, and his first feeling was a desire to show himself a respectable man who knew how things should be done. A requiem, brothers, for my old woman, he said. The priest should be told. Oh, all right, lie down, a voice cut him short. Pavel Ivanitch, the turner cried in surprise, seeing the doctor before him. Your honor, benefactor. He wanted to leap up and fall on his knees before the doctor, but felt that his arms and legs would not obey. Your Honor, where are my legs? Where are my arms? Say goodbye to your arms and legs. They've been frozen off. Come, come, what are you crying for? You lived your life, and thank God for it. I suppose you've had 60 years of it. That's enough for you. I am grieving. Graciously forgive me if I could have another 5 or 6 years. What for? The horse isn't mine. I must give it back. I must bury my old woman. How quickly it is all ended in this world. Your Honor, Pavel Ivanitch, a cigarette case of birchwood of the best. I'll turn you croquet balls. The doctor went out of the ward with a wave of his hand. It was all over with the turner. This is the end of Sorrow by Anton Chekhov.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Telephonic Conversation by Mark Twain. Consider that a conversation by telephone, when you are simply sitting by and not taking any part in that conversation, is one of the solemnest curiosities of modern life. Yesterday I was writing a deep article on a sublime philosophical subject while such a conversation was going on in the room. I noticed that one can always write best when somebody is talking through a telephone close by. Well, the thing began in this way. A member of our household came in and asked me to have our house put into communication with Mr. Bagley's downtown. I have observed in many cities that the sex always shrink from calling up the central office themselves. I don't know why, but they do. So I touched the bell and this talk ensued. Central office. Gruffy. Hello? Is it the central office? Of course it is! What do you want? Will you switch me on to the Bagleys, please? Alright! Just keep your ear to the telephone! Then I heard a klook, 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 klook. Then a horrible gritting of teeth, and finally, a piping female voice. Yes? Rising inflection. Did you wish to speak to me? Without answering, I handed the telephone to the applicant and sat down. Then followed that queerest of all the queer things in this world, a conversation with only one end of it. You hear questions asked, you don't hear the answer. You hear invitations given, you hear no thanks in return. You have listening pauses of dead silence, followed by apparently irrelevant and unjustifiable exclamations of glad surprise, or sorrow, or dismay. You can't make head or tail of the talk because you never hear anything that the person at the other end of the wire says. Well, I heard the following remarkable series of observations, all from the one tongue, and all shouted, for you can't ever persuade the sex to speak gently into a telephone. Yes? Why? How did that happen? What did you say? Oh no, I don't think it was. No, I didn't mean that. I meant, put it in while it is still boiling, or just before it comes to a boil. What? I turned it over with a backstitch on the selvage edge. Yes, I like that way too, but I think it's better to baste it on with Valenciennes or bombazine or something of that sort. It gives it such an air and attracts so much noise. It's 49 Deuteronomy 64 to 97 inclusive. I think we ought all to read it often. Perhaps so. I generally use a hairpin. What did you say? Children, do be quiet. Oh, B flat. Dear me, I thought you said it was the cat. Since when? Why, I never heard of it. You astound me. It seems utterly impossible. Who did? Goodness gracious! Well, what is this world coming to? Was it right in church? And was her mother there? Why, Mrs. Bagley, I should have died of humiliation. What did they do? I can't be perfectly sure because I haven't the notes by me, but I think it goes something like this. Tiroli lo 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 loli lo lo oh tolly lo lo li li do, and then repeat, you know. Yes, I think it is very sweet and very solemn and impressive, if you get the andantino and the pianissimo right. Oh, gumdrops, gumdrops. But I never allow them to eat striped candy. And of course they can't, till they get their teeth anyway. What? Oh, not in the least. Go right on. He's here writing. It doesn't bother him. Very well. I'll come if I can. Dear me, how it does tire a person's arm to hold this thing up so long. I wish he'd... Oh no, not at all. I like to talk, but I'm afraid I'm keeping you from your affairs. Visitors? No, we never use butter on them. Yes, that is a very good way, but all the cookbooks say they are very unhealthy when they are out of season. And he doesn't like them anyway, especially canned. Oh, I think that is too high for them. We have never paid over 50 cents a bunch. Must you go? Well, goodbye. Yes, I think so. Goodbye. 4 o'clock then. I'll be ready. Goodbye. Thank you ever so much. Goodbye. Oh, not at all. Just as fresh. Which? Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Goodbye. Hangs up the telephone and says, Oh, it does tire a person's arm so. A man delivers a single brutal goodbye, and that is the end of it. Not so with the gentle sex. I say it in their praise. They cannot abide abruptness. End of A Telephonic Conversation by Mark Twain.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The War Prayer by Mark Twain. It was a time of great and exalting excitement. The country was up in arms. The war was on. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. The drums were beating, the bands playing, the toy pistols popping, the bunched firecrackers hissing and spluttering. On every hand and far down the receding and fading spread of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Daily the young volunteers marched down the wide avenue, gay and fine in their new uniforms, the proud fathers and mothers and sisters and sweethearts cheering them with voices choked with happy emotion as they swung by. Nightly the packed mass meetings listened, panting, to patriot oratory which stirred the deepest deeps of their hearts, and which they interrupted at briefest intervals with cyclones of applause, the tears running down their cheeks the while. In the churches the pastors preached devotion to flag and country, and invoked the God of battles, beseeching his aid in our good cause in outpourings of fervid eloquence which moved every listener. It was indeed a glad and gracious time, and the half-dozen rash spirits that ventured to disapprove of the war and cast a doubt upon its righteousness straightway got such a stern and angry warning that for their personal safety's sake they quickly shrank out of sight, and offended no more in that way. Sunday morning came. Next day the battalions would leave for the front. The church was filled. The volunteers were there, their young faces alight with martial dreams, visions of the stern advance, the gathering momentum, the rushing charge, the flashing sabers, the flight of the foe, the tumult, the enveloping smoke, the fierce pursuit, the surrender. Then home from the war, bronzed heroes, welcomed, adored, submerged in golden seas of glory. With the volunteers sat their dear ones, proud, happy, and envied by the neighbors and friends who had no sons and brothers to send forth to the field of honor, there to win for the flag, or, failing, die the noblest of noble deaths. The service proceeded. A war chapter from the Old Testament was read. The first prayer was said. It was followed by an organ burst that shook the building, and with one impulse the house rose, with glowing eyes and beating hearts, and poured out that tremendous invocation, God the all-terrible, thou who ordainest, thunder thy clarion and lightning thy sword. Then came the long prayer. None could remember the like of it for passionate pleading and moving and beautiful language. The burden of its supplication was, that an ever-merciful and benignant Father of us all would watch over our noble young soldiers, and aid, comfort, and encourage them in their patriotic work, bless them, shield them in the day of battle and the hour of peril, bear them in his mighty hand, make them strong and confident, invincible in the bloody onset, help them to crush the foe, grant to them and to their flag and country imperishable honor and glory. An aged stranger entered and moved with slow and noiseless step up the main aisle, his eyes fixed upon the minister, his long body clothed in a robe that reached to his feet, his head bare, his white hair descending in a frothy cataract to his shoulders, his seamy face unnaturally pale, pale even to ghastliness. With all eyes following him and wondering, he made his silent way. Without pausing, he ascended to the preacher's side, and stood there waiting. With shut lids, the preacher, unconscious of his presence, continued with his moving prayer, and at last finished it with the words uttered in fervent appeal, Bless our arms, grant us the victory, O Lord our God, Father and Protector of our land and flag. The stranger touched his arm, motioned him to step aside, which the startled minister did, and took his place. During some moments he surveyed the spell-bound audience with solemn eyes in which burned an uncanny light. Then, in a deep voice, he said, I come from the throne, bearing a message from Almighty God. The words smote the house with a shock. If the stranger perceived it, he gave no attention. He has heard the prayer of his servant your shepherd, and will grant it, if such shall be your desire, after I, his messenger, shall have explained to you its import, that is to say, its full import. For it is like unto many of the prayers of men, in that it asks for more than he who utters it is aware of, except he pause and think. God's servant and yours has prayed his prayer. Has he paused and taken thought? Is it one prayer? No, it is two. One uttered, the other not. Both have reached the ear of him who heareth all supplications, the spoken and the unspoken. Ponder this. Keep it in mind. If you would beseech a blessing upon yourself, beware, lest without intent you invoke a curse upon a neighbor at the same time. If you pray for the blessing of rain upon your crop which needs it, by that act you are possibly praying for a curse upon some neighbor's crop which may not need rain and can be injured by it. You have heard your servant's prayer, the uttered part of it. I am commissioned of God to put into words the other part of it, that part which the pastor, and also you in your hearts, fervently prayed silently, and ignorantly and unthinkingly? God grant that it was so. You heard these words, Grant us the victory, O Lord our God. That is sufficient. The whole of the uttered prayer is compact into those pregnant words. Elaborations were not necessary. When you have prayed for victory, you have prayed for many unmentioned results which follow victory, must follow it, cannot help but follow it. Upon the listening Spirit of God fell also the unspoken part of the prayer. He commandeth me to put it into words. Listen. O Lord our Father, our young patriots, idols of our hearts, go forth to battle. Be thou near them. With them in spirit we also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. O Lord our God, help us to tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless with little children to wander unfriended the wastes of their desolated land, in rags and hunger and thirst, sports of the sun flames of summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave, and denied it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make heavy their steps, water their way with their tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask it in the spirit of love, of him who is the source of love, and who is the ever faithful refuge and friend of all that are sore beset and seek his aid with humble and contrite hearts. Amen. After a pause, Ye have prayed it. If ye still desire it, speak. The messenger of the Most High waits. It was believed afterward that the man was a lunatic, because there was no sense in what he said. End of the War Prayer by Mark Twain.